People who have met their online friends. What made you instantly regret it? Met my best friend at the time on League of Legends. After talking every day for 3 years, I ended up moving to a state much closer to him, so we decided to finally meet. We talked before about all the things we'd do together and how awesome it would be. I loved him so much. He was there for me through so much and was a wonderful friend. He had a new girlfriend at the time of our meetup and he brought her along with him. I had no problem with this, because I'd love to meet the woman who makes him happy. It was abundantly clear from the get-go that she wasn't a real big fan of me. I did my best to be kind, and still had tons of fun. I didn't hear from my friend much after that. A mutual good friend of ours messaged me, and when I asked about my best friend, they said that his girlfriend was telling people that I was basically an awful person for whatever reason. 3 years later and he is engaged to this woman and I'm happy for him, but I haven't spoken to him in those 3 years. I still miss him every day, and I wish I could be there for him on his wedding day. You are a beautiful soul. My brother met a girl in person that he had known for 4-5 years online, during which time they had kind of had an online relationship. She had brought her friend with her to meet him, and while they were sitting around a table awkwardly making conversation, with my brother apparently quite shocked at how bad she looked in person compared to how she looked online, and having absolutely no interest in her other than as friends, the girl sent her friend a message saying, "OMG, get me out of here. He's looking at me like he wants to jump me," but she accidentally sent it to my brother. What ensued was likely incredibly painful to be part of. My brother showed her his phone and looked at her in disgust. I would kill for such an easy out. Maybe not regret it, but it gave me years of depression. I met my best friend through Minecraft. Never made friends in this and I just wanted to play with someone. I have no idea why, so I complimented this girl's skin. We started talking. She was American. I am Polish and my English sucked. We moved to Skype and at first I mostly typed, but later on she started teaching me English somehow by talking with me. She was 1 year older. We knew each other for almost a year and I was staying up all night just to talk to her and her friends that she introduced to me. She was also depressed, so we talked with each other and she was the first person that truly listened to me. We had plans of visiting each other, and then our mutual friend told me she committed suicide. 4 years passed by and now at least I can talk about it and not cry. Still miss her very much though. She flew in town to be a bridesmaid in my wedding, and she decided to cheat on her husband with one of the groomsmen and blame me for that. Because it was my wedding, so that clearly makes it my fault she was unfaithful. How dare you have a wedding on this, the day of my adultery. Met a girl I really liked on WoW, but she lived in another country. After a couple of vacations there it turned into a relationship. Made the decision to move and start a new life there with her. After living there for 4 months I slowly realized she was crazy as heck. Huge mood swings paired with a lot of aggression. Ended up getting stabbed in the side by her while asleep. Needless to say, after getting out of the hospital I took the first plane back home. She's still in a psychiatric hospital. I invited him over to my house and he shat all over my toilet. Just to clarify, it was not in the toilet, it was on the seat and a bit of it landed on the floor. Well, that's a conversation starter. Jeez. It was supposed to be a date. She had her hand on another guy's leg at the bar. I did a Grandpa Simpson at the burlesque. I enjoyed this description of your quick escape. Was at a really bad place. Got bullied in school, was kinda chubby, and had some social anxiety. Went to LAN party with some friends I met over playing WoW. At the time I regretted it because they actually were good for me and gave me happiness. It ruined my then current plans for taking my life. Today I love them all more than life. So glad you found them. The fact the guy kept calling his exes crazy. He forgot I know several of his exes and they were still are the least craziest people I know. Ah yes, the Tom Haverford Method. When I was in high school I met a guy from a different high school in a local chat room. We hit it off and after a few days we agreed to meet up at the store I worked at once I finished work. Well, I guess he showed up a little early, with a friend, and came through my check stand. I thought it was him. We'd swapped photos, but I was really shy and didn't want to be wrong. I waited for him to introduce himself, but he never did, and he and his friend paid for whatever they had and left without conversation. I was still hopeful that wasn't the guy, so I waited up for him for an hour after my shift. Of course, he never showed, because that absolutely was the guy. He must have been disappointed when he met me in the checkout line, and instead of being a decent person and saying he wasn't interested, he just ghosted me. If I could go back in time, I definitely would have said something to him at the check stand. That's my one regret. For your information, that's all on him. He made it awkward. When I was 14, I had an online friend 2 states away who was 14. He and his mom took a trip TLC me, and the first thing we did when we saw each other was run full speed at one another. Our heads bounced off each other and I chipped my tooth and broke his braces. I am pretty sure his front tooth was also loose and had to go to the dentist to fix it, lol. The video is down below if you wanna see it. And I've gotten this question a few times. We don't talk much at all anymore, but I would consider us friends still. Met up with a friend I met in WoW. I fell down steps. Instead of helping or asking if I am okay, she laughed. Hard, like, not breathing, on the floor, gasping for air, seal clapping hard. We've been friends for like 8 years ever since that, and she still reminds me. She probably just didn't want you to cry. It works on babies. Friend for 6 years flies over to Australia to hang with me for a month. Little did I know he was a bit taller than me. I was 5 feet 10 inches. He was, well, 6 feet 7 inches. I never knew he was this tall. He never talked about it. And when I was at the Brisbane airport waiting for him, I texted him stating I don't know where you are, to which he replied, look up. Towering over everyone is this blonde guy that has the arm span of the airport lobby. I cried. We laughed. And I regret bringing him over because my ceiling almost hits his head. Bet you regret not cleaning the top of the fridge now. We went to a convention and he drunkenly told me and my boyfriend that he wished we weren't together so he could sleep with me. It was very awkward, and he's lucky my boyfriend, now husband, is a patient man. It was my friend Kate who befriended this girl, Jessica, who allowed us to come and stay with her when we traveled to the US. Jessica was rude to me instantly and kept my friend away from me. I'd go upstairs and she'd find a reason for them to go downstairs. She had Kate share her bedroom and she'd lock the door for hours, and so I'd just go off and do my own thing. We met at 2 odd friends and they both ignored me. When it was time for Kate and I to move on to another state, Jessica insisted on coming with us. The lady we stayed with in another state, Robin, took no crap and called Jessica out on her strange behavior. Jessica proceeded to lock herself in a room and demanded Kate stay in there with her. They were in there all day and eventually Kate came out and said to me that there's something wrong with Jessica and she's actually scared. We, Kate and I, had plans to stay with another online friend, Matt, in another state, and Jessica demanded we cancel because she doesn't like or trust Matt. We said no, this is our holiday and we've paid for flights, and Jessica said then she will come with us but we can't meet up with Matt. We said no. She cried. We left. Kate blocked her on everything. Kate's mother called us not long after saying Jessica contacted her crying, saying Kate is in danger and we abandoned Jessica, and she's so concerned for my friend's safety. Edit to add, as I recall, she claimed to be concerned about Matt and basically wanted Kate's mum to tell us to stay with Jessica. It was actually incredibly scary. Kate found out later from another girl, Jane, they all knew each other from a forum, that Jessica had been telling everyone they were in love and had even slept together. I don't know how much of that is true, but I've known Kate for 20 years now and she's never identified as anything but straight. She denied it 100%. Jessica was just obsessed with her, and months later Kate heard Jessica was telling everyone she was saving money to come to our country to find Kate. She never did. Thankfully, other than the time spent with this girl, we had a great holiday and made some good friends. I still talk to Matt, he's great. Added fake names to make story a bit clearer as some people had trouble following. I met a friend on here and we planned to travel together. We were in Desvuada city to start hitchhiking. I instantly regretted it because he seemed like he had no clue of what was happening and that made everything a bit annoying. That feeling lasted 2 days, and now I miss him very much and hope we could see each other again soon. On mobile, so forgive me for any weird formatting. I, F22, had a friend, M26, online for 11 years before we met. I'm Canadian, he is American. We met on a RP site when we were quite literally still kids and were a massive part of one another's lives, especially during our teenage years. We spoke every day through text, on the phone, had each other on social media. We even knew and sometimes spoke to each other's family and friends in real life. He called me his light and his sister, and I called him my brother. We were family. It would take a whole novel to explain our 11-year friendship and what we have been through together, but I'll just try to make it short by saying he had a very crappy and unstable life and a lot of mental health problems. He was a narcissist. I spent many years being his emotional crutch and punching bag, helping him find jobs, being there for his breakdowns. I never broke off the friendship because after all those years, I kind of felt responsible for him. Anyways, last year we finally decided to meet. We were both grown adults and saved money to go on a 10-day trip to a dream destination of mine in the States. I knew this likely would not go well. I knew he was a narcissist, but I just had to meet him. I had to meet my brother, the guy that was there for over a decade. I needed to see him face to face. On this trip he 1. Abandoned me on a mountain during a hike because he decided he wanted weed. When he came back I was obviously mad and wanted to go back to our hotel, but he told me to wait for him in the car while he did the hike on his own. I took an Uber home and he returned as well 4 hours later. 2. Automatically assumed I'd shell out $300 for him to buy a laptop he wanted, without asking me. Just brought me to the store to look around while we waited for our movie to start at the theater and sprung it on me. I refused. 3. Was overall inconsiderate. We only ate at places where he wanted to eat, when he wanted to eat, only did things he wanted to do and not me. Despite the trip being my idea, I missed out on a lot because he just wanted to sit around and do nothing. And so much more. What hurt the most is when I confronted him about it. He told me, "You're not my girlfriend. I don't need your approval or need to change for you to like me." I cut the friendship off and blocked him when we returned home. I also plan on retaking my dream trip one day and doing it properly this time. 11 years, wow. Sorry you went through that. When I was 19 I jumped on a flight to meet a friend I had known for about 4-5 months. We both went through family bereavements and were a shoulder to cry on for each other, via the phone or internet, and we just decided to meet for a few days in a country between us. Until then everything had been perfect. She was the coolest girl, really smart, the kind of person you want to be around all the time. When we met things started great, but a day later she confessed, "You're not what I expected." What 19-year-old and not very confident. This knocked me sideways. I don't know. Just, "You seem different." I never hid who I was before we met, was completely open, and it put a real sour taste on the rest of my time with her. Instead of chatting non-stop and watching Jackass on TV in the hotel at night, we went quiet and straight to sleep, ate in silence. I put as much effort as I could into it, but I still never got to the bottom of how I was different. We went our separate ways, texted for a few days, then never spoke again. She meant you weren't attractive enough for her. She had a fantasy in her head. I want to emphasize that it was an issue with her. I'm sure you're a great and attractive person. People can easily create fantasies about others when having not met in person, even after seeing photos. Not quite an instant regret, but there were 2 people I was meeting, Maisie and Maya, for the purpose of the story. We discussed meeting again, planned to have sleepovers, just generally have fun. The first day we met up went really well. We all had a good time. I thought it went brilliantly. Then a few weeks later I found out they were carrying out all the plans without me. They still have sleepovers to this day when Maya's back from uni and I'm just left out. I don't speak to either of them anymore. It hurt, lol. I'd met Maisie a few times before and it was fine. This all happened after I met Maya at the same time. A few months down the line Maya confessed she had a crush on me. Don't know if that played into it, but to heck with them. I had to travel to my country's capital for a surgery. After the surgery I couldn't move for 3 days, but the first day when I got up from the hospital bed, I obviously celebrated and told my online friends. They asked what hospital I was in. Long story short, they lived close and came to visit me. but it untilthy find. What do you regret? I regret meeting them in a wheelchair, not having showered, under heavy opioids. They were absolutely wonderful people, and I'll be seeing one of them in a few hours as she is visiting my hometown. Never actually met him but played Apex with a dude pretty regularly, almost every day. We finally exchanged info and then he used to call me repeatedly in depressed fits and be about how girls don't like him. It sucks cause I wanted to help but once it hit 36 calls in one day, I had to block : LOL holy shit. We met over a Dead by Daylight game. He was really charming, funny and nice. Then he fell in love with one girl of our gaming group and they started a long distance relationship. He even flew in to meet her in person. Turns out he is an abusive, narcissistic butthole who constantly belittled my friend. He gaslighted her and loved to play psycho games with our group. We stopped playing with him after a few weeks because he was so toxic to our group. Sadly, my friend struggled at that time and had difficulties to break up with him. Took her several weeks to finally do it. She is so much better now. Frick you Bowl. Another story about Bowl. He then lived with his father in a small apartment, and because he is a sloppy disgusting bastard and his father also, they only had like 3 underpants. And yes, I said they, because they shared them. I couldn't believe it. All the time he declared he wants to stop smoking weed, because it makes him stupid. Typical RRM's Osmit. Boy was dumb as heck. Bowl. Ugh. He wanted to frick. I just wanted friendship. He had photos from when he was 16 as the only photos he shared. He was 24 and looked nothing like that now. So much that I couldn't tell how he was the same person as in the photos. I was barely 18 and inexperienced in the world. Money didn't impress me, but he kept trying anyway. Motorcycles terrify me, but he kept trying to up his bad boy image by telling me all about his. All in all we were totally incompatible, but he kept trying. When I wouldn't bite, he decided I instantly hated him. That was more than 15 years ago. He's still using the same photos on meetup sites. I've called him out on it. He doesn't care. He says no one looks twice if he uses current photos. Truth is, it's his personality that sucks, not his face. Yee. There's more to the using a 16-year-old's photo thing, and it's not good. I'd report him somewhere quite honestly. I had a group of online friends for a bit and I am really close with my older brother like best buds, and one day while we were playing League I asked my brother to join after a while. I guess because my brother was better at the game than me they stopped inviting me to any games, so I eventually was separated from the group. One of them came to my state for an event and asked my brother if he wanted to go. He said yeah and then asked me. I was a bit hesitant but after my brother insisted I went. I did have fun but there were moments that made me remember that I am really not in that group anymore. Oh my god, you just described my entire childhood with my little brother. Made a RuneScape friend and chatted on and off for several years. He ended up being nearish to my town and we decided to get some food. Things were going great until a black man and white woman came in and he whispered, completely seriously, "I hate interracial couples." For a moment I thought it was the black man who whispered it. The lady was crazy. We met through an app that was advertised as a meet friends app and not a dating app. Well, turns out, it was a dating app. However, she put in her bio that she was married with 2 kids. I put that I was in a long-term relationship and looking for friends. BTW, I'm a guy, she wasn't. So when we arranged a meetup, her husband and 2 kids were there as well as my girlfriend. Everything was going great. Hung out a few times and added each other on Facebook. Turns out, she was super into the whole breastfeeding in public thing. Like, I get it, you go girl, but she was super obsessed with it. 4 out of every 5 pics she posted to FB was her boob in her kid's mouth. She hot angry when you looked away when in public. Like, she wanted you to stare at her while she breastfed. Just got to the point that I was super uncomfortable with it and moved on. WTF. Only 1 year I regret. The host decided to invite double what we had last year. 14 socially inept nerds in one house for a week. I had 6 panic attacks. Sounds like a movie I would watch. I met a friend on here, AskReddit, spoke for a few months online and then flew 2,000 miles to meet them. Unfortunately for our bank accounts, We fell madly in love and now engaged to married, meaning we're spending thousands on flights and, eventually, a visa application. He's the most expensive date I've ever had, but he's worth every penny. Online friendship turned into online relationship. Online relationship turned into meeting IRL. Meeting IRL led into not working relationship. Not working relationship turned into breaking up and not talking to each other anymore. Met her after gaming with her for like 5 years. My parents allowed me to have her visit me for a weekend. Unbelievably beautiful girl. Had a lot of deep talks on the phone. Were frequently flirting quite hard and stuff. She kind of was my first love interest. We went out for a drink with a few friends of mine. Started hitting on my best friend the second she saw him. Didn't even pay attention to me the whole evening, and the first thing she said the next morning was, "Let's go to his place." That freaking hurt. Alright, a few things. 1. That was 10 years ago, give or take. I've made similar experiences over and over until I learned how to be more precise and direct about my feelings, especially towards love interests. Today, I'm a self-confident guy in his mid-20s that is very secure around people, so I guess things worked out for me. 2. I stopped contacting her after that, while my best friend actually stayed close for quite some years, proceeding to have some strange kind of friends with benefits love affair type situation going on with her. I don't blame him. She was a gorgeous girl, even though it bothered me first. We are best friends still, while she has vanished into nothingness at some point. 3. As many refer to my best friend as a bad friend for not respecting my interest in said girl. He didn't flirt with her that evening at all. It was one-sided, really. Everything that happened between the two of them was afterwards. After I quit contacting her, he asked me if I was okay with him keeping contact, and I was, since my interest had poofed out of existence at this very evening. Seems like you weren't as forward in person as she expected. I have bad anxiety. I met them the first time when I went to Gamescom my first time. Long story short, I had to excuse myself roughly every 15 minutes the first 2 hours because I had to go puke somewhere. After I came down and was able to calm a little, it was fun as heck. But at first I wish I was dead, or at home. Good job going anyways. Didn't regret any of them, except one. We were all 15 years old, except one kid who was 12. We went to a zoo together and he just walked away from the group without us knowing. Half our time together was wasted splitting up and searching for him because we were concerned. We finally found him and he just told us his dad was going to pick him up and he left us because he didn't feel like it. Should have just told us straight away. We would have probably understood. He was literally gone after the first 10 minutes. I knew a girl who would befriend American gamers to the point where they would buy her free plane tickets that she'd end up using as a free holiday. She said she loved walking right past them at the airport while they looked for some chick who wasn't her. She never gave her real photos so they never knew. She did it at least twice. Cold-blooded. I used to play a lot of Quake and made a few friends through it. About 15 years ago I moved to a state where one of those friends happened to live. We met up, and we got along fine, if not a bit awkward in person. He offered I could come stay with him anytime, but it was a ways out of the city. We sort of lost touch, but just last year his relative contacts me out of the blue. She tells me that my friend had often spoke of me, using my old screen name, and was recently killed by another of our old online friends that he had invited to stay with him. It ended up being ruled as self-defense. She just wanted to know what I knew about the killer to try to make sense of it, but I couldn't remember much other than his old screen name. Serious, did you ever regret talking to a therapist psychiatrist? Why? I've been seeing a therapist for a year and it's been great. Some sessions are better than others, but it's helped me considerably with my issues of anxiety and depression. However, she suggested that I try one of the group classes, and I was hesitant, but I figured that the worst that could happen was a bad experience, and signed up for one. It went fine until the doctor teacher asked to share what was bothering us. I was not at all prepared for this. It takes a long time for me to open up to someone other than a doctor about this stuff. I was not remotely okay with sharing this information with total strangers. I basically had an anxiety attack while waiting for my turn, and did my best to hide it when I was asked to speak, but I wasn't able to form coherent sentences. The doctor reminded me to try some of the basic anxiety coping mechanisms and I basically clammed up after that. I spent the rest of the class trying to not dwell on the fact that I had a freaking anxiety attack right in front of people. I felt worse after that than I did before I started seeking help. It only really took me a week or so to feel normal again. But there is no freaking way that I'll ever do any kind of group therapy again. Group therapy is not for everyone. You tried it and that is a good start. Keep working with your therapist, but tell your therapist about your experience with the group session. I did. I found it really difficult to talk about things and it was emotionally draining. I'm a reserved kind of guy, and I don't talk about that kind of thing. So opening up was unnatural and too much to deal with for me. I also saw a Christian therapist, which in hindsight maybe wasn't the best idea for someone questioning their sexuality. There was a time when I felt down a lot, so I figured seeing a therapist might be a smart move. She told me emotions are a triangle of happy, sad, and angry if I recall correctly. Whenever you feel sad or angry, just think about things that make you happy. That's it. That's all there is to it apparently. Thanks doc. I am happy. I should focus on what makes me angry and sad instead. Yeah, when I was in my late teens, this therapist suggested I should only think happy thoughts, that the abuse I received was my own fault for not standing up for myself, and when all of that didn't work she prescribed a high dose of Xanax for me. Literally said she would be beating the crap out of her own daughter if she found out she was cutting herself like me. Back then, I thought this was the norm and she was right. A better therapist later on told me that she was messed up and demanded the company she was with to make sure she wouldn't ever have another client again. Apparently she got many complaints as she did this to many of her clients. As a professional therapist, I find it unbelievable that someone can go through an accredited program and come out with not one iota of understanding basic therapy skills. I'm so sorry you went through that. Yes. Husband and I went to marriage counseling after a large marriage altering event. He chose a Christian counselor. I had misgivings, but went anyway. Chick basically spent every session telling us to read some workbook she was selling, not even one she had written, and then ended in prayer. Yay, not helpful at all. We ended up only going a handful of times and working things out on our own instead. Yes, more or less every time I see her. Dunno if it's just my therapist or it's like this all the time, but she doesn't seem to understand the things she suggests don't work for me. She is also very antagonizing and it feels like she blames me for the way I am as if I am bringing it on myself or something. This doesn't mean to say I regret opening up about my problems because I find talking to my mum and my brother helps a lot. Kind of, but not really. The time I went in my adult years I had two issues. Anxiety attacks when answering the phone in a new job, and no empathy. The anxiety was an easy fix but the no empathy was caused by me being a sociopath, which I wasn't aware of. Most people feel, optionally think, do. See sick dog. Feel sad. Maybe think that dog is sad. It makes me sad. Comfort dog. But I think, optionally feel, do. See sick dog. Think that makes most people sad. Comfort dog. Carry on with day unaffected. We did some sessions on identifying correct reactions, a lot of which I was already doing, which is supposedly impressive for someone without natural feeling, but mostly it just sucked to find out I was naturally broken and it can't really be cured. I have to manually care. My natural state is being in butthole. It's good to know, but not particularly motivating knowledge. We are all broken just in different ways. I am a psychologist and I would be happy if most of my clients had as much self-awareness as you do. Yup, she didn't understand what I told her and kept talking to me like was I a child. I mean, I was but a child back then, but she didn't change her approach after several failed sessions and didn't want to hear when I said that this method wasn't working. But neither would she listen to when my mom told her to change approach. So after roughly half a year I stopped seeing her, and my 9yo self concluded that if someone whose job it is to help people with problems could not help me, then no one could, and after that I held every feeling back and hid my emotions cause no one could help me, and I didn't want to appear weak. Mixed. At first I had a bad one that kept making me relive a traumatic experience. That actually made me much worse. I switched to CBT. cognitive behavioral therapy, where I didn't speak about specific things at all, just retrained my brain handle experiences differently. That was fantastic. Best thing I could ever have done. Only took about 8 or 10 weeks appointments and the results lasted forever. The kicker here is that you did the dang work on CBT. I do CBT therapy for addictions, and some of my clients don't do the dang homework and processes outside of my office and then wonder why nothing ever changes. Like, holy crap, it is work to help yourself. Put in the effort into you. I wouldn't say I ever regretted anything, but it took a lot of time and patience to find the right therapist. I don't really know how to explain it, but you just kinda have to find one that you click with. I eventually did, but she was a psychiatrist, so I could only see her every 8 weeks and her job was mostly about adjusting my meds and trying to help me find a psychologist I could also click with. Yes, very much so. I struggled a lot as a teen with bullying at school and what amounted to what I now recognize as emotional abuse at home. I was very depressed and anxious. I started having thoughts of suicide at age 13. I eventually convinced my parents to let me see a psychiatrist, though they didn't really think there was a problem. I was a HS freshman at the time, so 15-16. I liked the doctor a lot at first. He was friendly. He really listened to me talk about my issues, and he was the only sympathetic adult in my life at that point. I thought, after a while, he told me the way I was being treated at home was very wrong, and he wanted me to bring my dad into a session so we could all talk about it together. He felt that if he were mediating the conversation, my dad might actually take my feelings seriously. I thought, wow, this is great. I will finally be heard. The next time I came in, I brought my dad, but the doc did a complete 180, talking about me with my dad as if I weren't even there. He told him he was doing a good job as a parent, but I was just a bad and rebellious kid who did everything for attention. The best thing to do, he said, was ignore my attention-seeking behaviors and not validate them in any way. He said he didn't believe I was really depressed at all and was faking to get drugs. A friend had died in a car accident just a few days before, so I was already in an emotionally vulnerable place. Whenever I tried to speak, they'd just talk over me, like I was just something, not a person with feelings. I started to cry, so the doctor pointed at me and said, pretty triumphantly, "See, she's crying now because she knows I'm right. I can't be right because I'm old. Isn't that right, Dan Haverford? You can't stand for an adult to be right." I tuned out whatever was being said after that, just quietly cried while they continued discussing me and my issues with authority or whatever. Home life worsened after that because now there was even less of a chance for me to ever be listened to or taken seriously. I self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. It was many years before I felt comfortable seeking help again. That butthole is probably retired or dead by now, but frick him. I'm still salty about it. Yes, she repeated, what I have to do is changing my personality. Feeling depressed and anxious is about my personality. Interesting. Not completely. I'm mostly convinced my therapist and I just weren't a good match, and that she was too mild for the size of my issues, combined with me not being able to explain the size of my issues very well. I came to therapy with one major problem, and through the process of her asking questions, she made it about something completely different. I wanted to talk about my problems, but she wanted to talk about completely other stuff, in this case mostly my parents. Not denying it, my parents had been a problem factor for most of my life, so I don't blame her, cause the stories I told about my parents were quite problematic. But I already knew that and had accepted that. My parents weren't the reason I went to therapy. Now, since this was my first time having therapy, I kinda told myself that she knew what she was doing and that maybe my parents did play a bigger factor than I thought. However, nearing the end of therapy and afterwards, I didn't feel like anything was solved at all. Even if my main problem was my parents, it ended up in just accepting that they were crap, which I already knew. My actual problem wasn't solved in any way, and it pretty much just ended up being a waste of time and money. The only useful thing I got out of it was general cognitive therapy strategies which deal with generally figuring out where your actions and thought patterns originate from. Therefore I don't completely regret it, and also because it taught me how to act next time I ever seek therapy, and that is to be very clear about what is bothering you and what it is you want to solve. I do want to stress that there is rarely a reason to not go to therapy, cause I feel like this thread may be a derivative of that question. Therapy can definitely help a great deal, even if just for the sake of spilling your thoughts to someone. My mistake was that I kinda went along with whatever my therapist said or asked. You need to remember that you are the one this therapy is meant for, and you need to be the one walking out the door feeling at least the slightest bit lighter or more understood. The therapist's life isn't affected much. They will do whatever they think will help you, and if you agree too soon, they won't keep digging. It's necessary for you to do some actual prepping beforehand to make clear for yourself what it is you want and need. Stay your ground. Don't quit until you get the results you want, and therapy could be a really great thing. Yes, I told one I wanted to hang myself once and his response was, "That's interesting. That's a typically male way to die." He offered no help, just confused me talking about things that didn't apply to me after getting into an argument with my friend who was with me for support. I went to see a therapist in my teens as I had developed an eating disorder. I made it very clear to her that I, 1, was okay with my appearance, quite happy with it. I was, and still am, naturally skinny and fit and loved my body. 2, loved food, enjoyed cooking. 3, the not being able to eat was likely stress related due to the pressure of my studies and I hated every minute of it because I missed food. She determined I was anorexic, hated the way I looked and was choosing not to eat to punish myself. She would often comment on my looks and how I dressed. She then forced me to keep a food diary even after I told her doing so was stressing me out even more. She never addressed the actual root of the problem or ever listened to what I had to say, and made me scared to ever seek therapy out again. During my first year at uni I developed severe social anxiety. In my second year I went to a counselor at uni to try and get over it. I didn't obviously know what it was. I saw him every week for about 8 weeks. Always it would come back to my parents and my childhood. Every time. No matter what we talked about. It was like he had one tool at his disposal and was determined to make it fit. Finally, out of the blue he said, "You don't really want to be treated, so I can no longer help you." And that was it. Obviously almost 20 years later I am completely on top of this now that it's blown up into full-on avoidance. So in a way, the problem took care of itself. Thanks random uni counselor. I've found that avoidance does make things worse for me, and it was mentioned briefly in this one psych module I took. But yes, colon is definitely a tough one. Yep, my therapist, who has been seeing for a year prior for other reasons, had incredibly unreasonable expectations for a new relationship of mine. Talking about true love and how some people just get so lucky finding their person so young. I remember having misgivings at the time, but continued seeing her. Started having relationship problems, so brought him with me to the therapist. Turns out it was the beginning stages of abuse on his part, but my therapist said nothing. Therapist started getting erratic and giving contradictory advice in the same session. Ended up having to dump the therapist before dumping the so. Ironically, this therapist is supposedly the best in my area for post-abuse counseling. I'm scared for you now, lol. I went to see one for social anxiety and ended up being quizzed about my sex life. Within 10 minutes she asked me without prompting if I was a virgin, and then just kind of, IDK, recoiled. When I said well, yeah, that then became the new topic of conversation. Despite that not being the source of my anxiety or something I really care about that much, she was weirdly Freudian about it all, hypothesizing my lack of sex to be the source of my anxiety, and asking repeatedly about my relationship with my mother. When I eventually navigated the conversation back to my anxiety in the abstract, she seemed kind of, IDK, disinterested. I eventually just left without scheduling another meeting. 1/10 would not recommend. I don't know if this counts, but I regret ever talking to my doctors about my anxiety depression. Honestly, I don't think they understand how to deal with it very well. They either give you some crappy talk you've heard 1,000 times before online that changes nothing, or shove done soul-sucking pills into your hand. I've dealt with it better through friends. Nothing has helped me more than sitting down and having a drunk conversation with a friend. who I consider a brother to me, and just spilling my heart out to him, and have him understand, and even relate to a lot of the problems I have. Professionals just don't feel genuine to me. It's like they've given this advice a million times before, and it just feels like it's automated advice at this point. They might as well just hand you a slip with all the info on it, and say better. Yep, as a teen I had a few sessions with a psychologist. I wanted to go in order to talk about some historical trauma, but my father was paying for the sessions because he wanted me to figure out how to better adapt to life with his new batshit crazy wife. After a few sessions, I found out that the psychologist was having regular discussions over the phone with my father and disclosing what I was saying during our sessions. I promptly freaked out and then refused to seek psychological help, which I really needed, for close to a decade. I told my first therapist that I have anger issues that I really need help working through because it's destroying my life. She just shook her head and goes, "Oh, I don't believe you have anger issues." I showed her a picture of the hole in my living room wall from where I put my fist through it. "That was an accident, I'm sure. You're such a sweet girl. You could never have anger issues." I tried to talk to that same therapist about my abusive, controlling mother. She informed me that she could be my new mother. So anyway, after I unceremoniously fired her, I tried a new therapist. She really seemed to enjoy getting all the hot gossip about my awful mother but had zero advice to give me. Well, that's not true. She did give me advice, once. I told her about my social anxiety-induced panic attacks every time I'm in an unfamiliar place, and she suggested that I go to a very crowded local amphitheater and just hang around and try to make friends with the strangers there. I don't see any therapists anymore. Yeep. This once there was an ED psychiatrist whom, once she found out that I am engaged, asked me, "Don't you think your fiancé will get tired of you and leave you?" Which has nothing at all to do with the current issue. What a bee. My therapist was a freaking prick. Told him I was lonely and he said I can't be lonely because I was only 22. The second therapist I went to got butt because I said I felt more comfortable working with men than women in the workplace and wanted to argue about it. So yeah, I'm a bit hesitant to see someone now. She treated me like a product and did her job like it from a checklist. I wasn't in a good mental state at the time and she pushed too many of my buttons. The most notable thing I said to her was, "Stop regurgitating the same bile you find off of the internet and do your freaking job." I saw a few therapists through the mental health center at my university a few years ago, and I came to regret the whole experience. I really hate this outcome, because it's made me feel reluctant to revisit therapy even though I can imagine it being beneficial. The first time I saw a therapist for intake, he shuffled me into group therapy pretty much immediately. I had a hard time dealing with it because it felt very hard to practice behaviors, which is what we were meant to do, and even harder to open myself up to talk about my anxieties and experiences. The session leaders pretty much said group therapy was a failure for me. At the end of the term, they suggested I start over with another therapist. I did just that, and saw the same therapist once a week for 5 weeks. I felt good about seeing him at first because he seemed to focus on concrete ideas I could recognize and pointed out specific action steps I could make to feel better. By weeks 4 and 5, however, the tone seemed to shift and he was being what I would otherwise call a devil's advocate. With each example I'd share or story I'd tell, he'd take the other person's side, no matter how ridiculous, and eventually started acting personally wounded by the ways I responded to that. I felt more confused and isolated than ever, and he started talking about group therapy again. I expressed concern, but he insisted. This process, minus the devil's advocate step, thankfully, repeated for about 6 months with 2 more therapists and 2 more near immediate transitions to unsuccessful group therapy. The only thing I got out of it was feeling a bit better about being able to respond to peers and give advice perspective. But in the end I really felt attacked, abandoned, and even betrayed, and it will be hard for me to ever go to therapy again. Yep. I told her I think I have PTSD because I have all the symptoms and suffered traumatic things. She said only people who end up in A&E after being battered can have PTSD from abuse. She totally invalidated me, and I know it was ignorant, as the NHS website states you can have PTSD even from neglect, and I experienced a lot worse than just that. I just wanted to be evaluated, listened to, heard. But once again I wasn't, which was quite horrible to deal with. She was saying about how people try to find something to fit a reason and expressed I seem to be seeking too much, searching for answers. I was searching for answers, but that's because I wasn't getting proper help and I was struggling to function in normal life. Sleep terrors, emotional flashbacks, severe shame attacks, severe anxiety, dissociation, etc. Of course I was looking for answers. I also got told that I couldn't get counseling there, which wasn't her fault but the NHS fault for referring me to the wrong place. I wasn't currently being abused and they wouldn't treat people who had escaped the abuse. That was hard because I had been trying to get help for a while and my hopes kept being squashed. She also handled it all badly by having me talk about the abuse I experienced, which got me into a really bad state, then there being no closing down of that. I found it really hard to function in the following days and found myself needing to drink to calm my nerves to be around other people at work. Only time I've ever drank at work. I know that's bad, but I didn't feel I had another option to not have a nervous breakdown. Overall, it was a terrible experience and nothing came of it anyway. I opened myself up to get shot down and told we can't help you. It's the invalidation and ignorance that was the worst though. It made me lose a lot of hope and faith in the healthcare system. I can understand them being unable to help because of a referral mistake. Way late to this party, but yes. Growing up my mother made me go to therapy. She drove me every Tuesday while I sat and talked about my feelings. This happened for 2 years. One day she takes me to the therapist's office and runs in before me saying she just needs to talk to her, and she takes my appointment. After that, now my mother and I have back-to-back appointments. After a while, I noticed my mother was referencing things I had told my therapist, private things, about how I was feeling regarding the relationship with my mother. This happened for another 2 years before I stopped going altogether. I was sick of everything I told anyone by proxy be told to my mother. Was sick of everyone trying to fix the fact that I just felt neglected and unloved and like I didn't have the guidance that I needed to get through a very difficult time in my life. I have gone back to therapy a couple of times since, but I can never really feel truly comfortable talking to someone like that again. There was so much betrayal that happened there. I'm still mending that almost 20 years later. My mom ended up going to the same therapist for about 10 years afterwards. She really stunted my mother's growth as a single mom as well, and it made everything more difficult. We're just now getting our footing. This sounds like what's happening in my life now. I'm a young adult and my mother feels the need to come into my appointments with me. I never get any talking done because most of my problems are about her. I'm glad you're sharing your experience so others know they aren't alone. I don't regret having talked to a therapist or psychiatrist in principle. There is a very dismaying effect if you finally go to one and it isn't the right one for you though. So there are specific cases where I would have been better off not going and talking to the specific therapist or psychiatrist in question. But going to one in principle is a good idea. If you get the right one, your life can change dramatically for the better. Was in and out of various forms of therapy for years with childhood issues. While most weren't regret, just not the right fit, there are some I'll look back on as potentially just as traumatizing as my actual issues. There was one therapist who insisted my disorder was just lack of willpower. This, coming from a lady who was so fat she struggled to get out of her chair. Yeah lady, you go ahead and preach willpower when you haven't had the willpower to stay fit, not even fit, just mobile. Was also obsessed with frog statues and sent me outside to count them while she had a chat with my mum about how hopeless it all was. Another was a psychiatrist, the only one I went to. She told my mum there was absolutely no hope of fixing me. None at all. No hope. So, as there was absolutely no way to fix me, I obviously had to keep going back to her. Literally, if anyone can explain what the frick her logic was there, I would love to know. Also asked me intimate, useless details about my life. Yes, Ms. Whatever. The solution to my deep-seated trauma lies in the cousins I have never spoken to, or perhaps the name of my grandparents' dog. I was super lucky that my mum remained hopeful that there was a solution, and pulled me from any therapist that wouldn't work. I'm, mostly, better now, for anyone who cares. When I told him that I was worried people only hang out with me because I make jokes, he said, well, everyone has their role in a group. Great, I'll just keep trying to be funny all the time, and if I ever have an off day everybody will leave. Thanks, doc. Vulnerability is my big reason. I've never been good with confessing my issues, so when I saw the psychiatric nurse last month I felt open and weak, which is apparently common amongst young men. I've still not attended an appointment with the psychiatrist because I'm afraid of admitting that I have a problem. If I talk about it, it then becomes an issue I have to deal with. My primary diagnosis was one of an ongoing 12-year struggle with depression and a self-defeating personality disorder with potentially undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia as a child. I went to one about a year ago. At first it was promising. Of course she told me to do sports. I'm a sportive guy, no problem. But she told me I should really start running. I hate running. It's so boring to me. But whatever. Did some other sports. At first she was listening to me and giving me advice, but honestly nothing new. I talk regularly with my best friend and he gives equally good or better advice. Everything she told me was kinda obvious, stuff that everybody will tell you. But then I started to get the feeling that she was working against me. Longer story. My GF at that time started spending a lot of time with a guy friend. Okay, know what I am worth and I'm not jealous. Time passes, nothing happens. Because we were on the kinkier side we tried a lot, and because she was my first I feared that I may be missing out on something. Whatever. I'm shy and just together with her because she was my best friend and confessed her feelings for me. What I want to tell is I have a giant problem with getting to know girls and starting relationships, something sexual. One day my GF proposes the idea of a kind of open relationship. I'm not that convinced, but she tells me I'll find a girl to have fun with and hopefully it'll develop into a threesome. Ooh, okay then. Time passes but I find no girl. Also because I'm anxious and don't want to. One evening she starts a topic about polyamorous relationships and such, and I read an article she showed me. I get a bad feeling all of a sudden and we talk and she admits that she has feelings for someone. A punch is in my stomach. I already know. You guessed right, the dude. Okay. Did something happen? We kisses when we both were drunk. Some weeks ago and she didn't tell me. I was sad, furious and felt betrayed. I knew in this moment that she just pressured me into this to not feel bad about her feelings for the guy. Back to the therapist. I told her how I felt and she says I'm wrong. I have no right to feel this way and I'm childish. What frick you? I'm not telling you anything anymore. Had a couple sessions but basically lied to her about stuff because I had the feeling she personally stacked me with what she said. Worked out with my GF after I took some LSD and opened up to her again. But at the beginning of the year she broke up with me. Feel like crap at times and consider getting therapy again, but know for sure I'm not going to my old therapist. Don't blame yourself for what your girlfriend did to you and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise, even if it's a therapist. Cheating is wrong and not telling you're so crap like that is even worse. I hope you find your peace and happiness in life. Teachers of Reddit. Have you ever accidentally said something to the class that you instantly regretted? I worked as a teacher at a school for kids with special needs. One day a girl would not stop saying money shot, money shot, money shot and then chuckling. A few of the boys knew what she was referring to and chuckled as well. I asked her to stop saying money shot. She looked up at me and stopped laughing and in all earnestness asked, "What does money shot mean?" I froze, not knowing what to say. Being a male staff, there was no way I could explain the dirty meaning of money shot to a 17-year-old student with special needs. So I opened my big dumb mouth and just said, "Google it." Within about 3 seconds I realized what I had just said and loudly yelled, "No, no, don't Google it." I once said, "Are you freaking kidding me?" in earshot of my 6th graders after I watched the class bully go up to bat and strike out. Prior to this I had overheard him telling some other boys, behind the backstop, how much of a pea they are and to watch me knock it out of the park. Class bully swung like a wimp and the nerdy non-athletic kids ended up having a field day with him. The students turned and stared at me after I said it, and they asked me, did I just hear you say freak? I turned to the students and said, no, but I just heard you say it. We continued on with our game and had a great day. Well played. When I taught 4th grade, I had a hearing impaired little boy who wore special hearing aids that picked up my voice from a microphone I wore around my neck while teaching. I was pretty good about turning it off when I was not delivering a lesson, but sometimes I forgot. One day I was so frustrated with my class, and I went into the hallway to cool off. I vented quietly, while banging my head against the wall. These stupid freaking kids, I want to knock their stupid freaking heads together. Of course I didn't mean it. Took a deep breath and went back in. The little boy was smiling a crap-eating grin and winked at me. He never told anyone. He was so cool. That's the coolest thing ever. I was talking about genres of literature to my 3rd graders and I said something along the lines of, fantasy is something made up or that couldn't happen, like Santa Claus. I heard a gasp from a student and another student said, nah. I was at that guy, the guy who took away the mystery. Out of the office I did that to my friend's 3 younger siblings. I got in so much trouble for that. A student once came into my math class to promote a donkey basketball game the teachers were going to participate in. He said, I don't know about you, but I really want to see Mr. C, referring to the teacher of the class we were in. Get up on that butt and ride it. Mr. C instantly responded, you sound like my wife. After my peers burst into hysterical laughter, he explained, absolutely mortified. He meant the student's comment reminded him of his wife saying that she wanted to see in butt riding and butt. I'm a high school English teacher. My first year teaching, my freshmen were learning plot elements. As the kids were quietly jotting down notes for defining the word climax, one completely naive boy raised his hand and asked, is it possible to have more than one climax? It took everything I had to keep it together. Only if the author is female. I taught English in a maximum security juvenile detention facility that was made up of primarily inner city kids anywhere from 13-17. Kids were there on any number of charges ranging from repeat drug offenses to weapons charges, rape, and murder. I was teaching a unit on text connections, text to text, text to self, text to world. I had brought in an article on PTSD in the military because a number of students in my class's cell block groups had mentioned they had family members who were or had been in the service. A buddy of mine was active duty army and I figured this was something we could make an easy connection with. The lesson went over great in 2 classes. The last, however, was extremely difficult. ME. Does anyone here have a family member or friend who has served in the military? Crickets. ME. Does anyone have a friend whose family members have been in the military? Crickets. ME. Does anyone know anybody who may know someone who has been in the military? Crickets. Growing frustrated and trying to force the kids to make any connection I could come up with, I stupidly blurt out, ME. Does anyone in the room know anyone who has killed somebody? Crickets. Then suddenly, student N. You in a room with about 8 of them. Awkward silence. The matter-of-fact way I imagine the kid saying that is cracking me up. Preface. The word for penis in Japanese is chinchin. I was a teacher in Japan at the time, in a 6th grade class. We were playing a game and I was naming different body parts for them to touch. Touch your knee, touch your eyebrow, touch your elbow. I was having trouble thinking of the next part for them to touch, and blurted out touch your chin without thinking. Cue 26th grade boys laughing and grabbing their crotches. Now I am gonna go to Japan and run around saying not by the hairs of my chinny chin chin. In high school there was a student named Porky. Everyone at the school knew he was a stoner. One day our science teacher got B because everyone failed the test, except for Porky. She yelled maybe you should all start smoking pot, because Porky here is the only one who passed the test. Bringing a new meaning to puff, puff, pass. I used to work at a preschool as a toddler teacher. We had these annoying strings hanging from the ceiling with clothespins on them, so that we could clip up artwork or decorations. One of them was right at our level, and after walking right into it several times and uttering obscenities under my breath, I decided to take it down. One boy, a very observant little boy as it turns out, asked me, where dang it go? It took me a week to convince him that clothespins are not called damnits. Yes, These are the best. With little kids you get a million of these stories. I once had a girl in my early preschool class who was playing mommy in the kitchen center. She was banging dishes around in the sink and kept shouting crap over and over. Her mom was mortified when we told her. I remember something my teacher once said to the class that made everyone cringe. We were in secondary school and working on some maths problems as the teacher went around the room helping. A boy in my class, Chris, had a really bad lisp and in an attempt to get the teacher's attention shouted "Thir" as in so quick as a flash the teacher replied "Yeth, Cree." Everyone burst out laughing and the teacher was obviously horrified at what he had said. He was a new teacher and obviously was so used to joking around with his mates that he just forgot where he was for a second. About 6 years ago, I am teaching 7th grade writing. I had just gotten a new student who could be best described as strange. My lesson is coming to an end and I am getting ready to give the assignment. The strange new kid raises his hand about the same time as another student. He then begins to whistle at me while raising his hand. I turn to him and explode. I ask, "Do you think I am a freaking dog?" The class erupts in laughter. I never lived that one down. All the classes heard about it. TLDR, I dropped the F-bomb on a new kid. In your defense, it is really rude to whistle at somebody. I was teaching Beowulf to a bunch of seniors and somehow or another had to describe and sketch out a few of the weapons on the board. When I got to the double-headed battle axe, I took one look at my sketch and erased it immediately. Too late, I had already drawn a penis on the board in front of 20+ boys. Pandemonium ensued. Now class, I'm not an artist. I work at a juvenile correctional facility as a teacher. One day my students were really grouchy and uncooperative, so I got flustered and said, "Boy, are you guys crabby today?" Quicker than I could understand what was happening, 5 of the biggest, burly, known gang-affiliated youth shot up out of their chairs with literal fire in their eyes and said, "What the frick did you just say?" Turns out the Bloods gang members will sometimes call the Crips gang members crabs to insult them. Thankfully they quickly realized I did not mean it with malice. Being a pasty middle-aged white guy, and sat down before it got ugly. TLDR, accidentally insulted the Crips gang while teaching at a JUV correctional facility. During student teaching I split the class up into groups to learn about how different social groups, women, African Americans, Native Americans, Mexican Americans, farmers, etc., were impacted by the New Deal. Once they were in their groups I sent them to different areas of the classroom to research. When I dropped this line, "Where are my African Americans at?" African Americans to the back of the classroom, there were 2 black kids in class. My teacher did the exact same thing to me in 6th grade social studies. I was one of the black kids. I wonder if that was my teacher or is it just common for this to happen. My teacher told me if we wouldn't stop talking she would stop teaching. She regretted that. No joke, I had a teacher who actually did that. Every lesson, I failed English. 7th grade, my first year teaching. Kid did not want to read his next line of dialogue in A Christmas Carol. I thought he was just nervous about reading to the class, so I say, very reassuringly with a smile, "I know it's hard." And then he said his next line. Very attached to me was "dong." Whole class busts up laughing. Whoever put that in the textbook was definitely trolling middle school teachers. I'm a middle school art teacher. I had my 8th grade students make paper mache initials, decorating them to match their personality. Anyway, we were putting them away one day when one of the kids goes, Miss Kitten, where do you want the D?" And I said, "Oh, wherever it will fit." The class died laughing and it took me about 2 seconds to realize what I'd said. Oops. Something similar happened to my band instructor. He was going on about how we weren't articulating enough and he said, "The D has to be hard." The whole class busted out in laughter. He turned bright red and left the room for about 10 minutes. I was teaching English at a kindergarten, Hakwon, in South Korea. It was my first teaching gig and I didn't really know what I was doing. The kids were very young and were getting bored with my lesson. They were leaving their chairs and started singing songs, Kiddie Chaos, etc. In a moment of dumb frustration I smacked my forehead and said, "Oh frick." All of the kids heard what I said clearly and at the same time they all dropped what they were doing and mimicked me. 15 kids were running around the class and smacking their foreheads while saying "oh frick" really loudly. They saw that I freaked out a little when I said, no 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 no, and held my hands out in a pleading manner. So they, in turn, all said no 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 and mimicked me again. At that moment I just laughed at what was happening because they had no idea what they were saying but were having a lot more fun than learning about verbs. It was an experience I'll always remember. Yeah, I sucked at teaching. I'm imagining that scene in Ice Age with all the sloths who mimic what Sid does, but replacing sloths with small children. My buddy is kind of an awkward guy and he teaches high school. He had just shaved his beard and, in class, a kid says, "Oh, Mr. Jones, you shaved," knowing he usually shaves his neck. He grabs his face and says, "Oh, you mean up here?" Kids die laughing thinking he's talking about shaving his balls in front of high school kids. One day in high school, a student Amanda mentioned to the class that her father ran marathons. The students who knew her father went on to talk about how fit he was and how young he looked. This was the day after parent-teacher conferences, and upon hearing this conversation, our gay Spanish teacher chimed in with, "Yeah, he's a DILF." The class froze. Amanda started crying, and he almost got fired. When I was a teacher's assistant, the school had some kind of clown in for some assembly. He proceeded to tell us a story with a moral to it, made entertaining with actions and miming. It was about a guy who was ice fishing. Problem was that the clown was French Canadian, and with his accent when he said ice it sounded like butt. Blissfully unaware of this, he told an elementary school all about a guy going butt fishing, and all of the things he did around the butthole. Little did you know, that was on purpose. My so was a middle school teacher for a couple years and she told me this story. She was talking about the importance of doing their homework. She was trying to think of something to say and she came up with, "You can't just go home and play video games naked all day." Some kid from the back of the class shouts, "Is that what you do after school?" Cue a red face and boisterous laughter. So that's where my mustache went. My math teacher accidentally called this Mexican kid a beaner and then tried to play it off to the class like it was his cool nickname or something. My best friend and I just looked at each other in shock because nobody else even noticed nor knew what the word meant. UHH. His nickname's Beaner because he's like a jelly bean. You just want a UHH. Eat him you. Maybe I should start over. I'm teaching summer school in Baltimore City this summer. 2 days ago, instead of saying we'll start with the form of a thesis statement, I said let's start with the storm of a thesis statement. We did not accomplish as much as I wanted to that day. That's almost poetic, with the storm of a thesis statement. My social studies teacher heard kids calling a short chubby boy Chode and assumed it was his nickname. So instead of asking what it meant, he called him that for 3 months in class before finding out what it meant. He then apologized for about an hour straight to the kid. Good times in 10th grade. Not a teacher, but I was a nanny for some time, and one time we pulled up to the house and my phone was ringing. After I pulled over and answered the call, I told the kids we'd go inside in a minute. It was my boyfriend, and he said something that shocked me and I said, "Oh crap," completely forgetting the kids were in the back seat. Age 2, 4 and 8. The 2 and 4-year-old were almost asleep and didn't catch on. But I looked back after I got off the phone and the 8-year-old's eyes were wide as tea saucers. I played stupid and said, "What?" like I had no idea. He said, "You said the S word. Mom gets so angry when dad says that word. We're never supposed to say it." He looked so mortified, and I told him that I was telling my boyfriend how to make deviled eggs. He didn't know what they were, so I showed him on my phone what they looked like. And I told him that I was telling my boyfriend how to make the yolk filling. I told him that he actually heard me say "oh shit" but only heard the second part. He totally bought it, and the mom howled with laughter when I told her later about it later. My English teacher once said, and I quote, "Class, it is time for some pleasure reading, so grab your copies of Huckleberry Finn and get going." He is a pretty old-fashioned teacher, but he busted out laughing at his mistake, then asked us not to tell anyone. Had a computing teacher about 6 years ago. Great guy, bit of a dry sense of humor though. Me and him got along well. One day this girl kept asking to use his computer to check her emails because Hotmail was blocked for students, so they didn't use MSN or whatever. She kept asking and asking until he finally said, "Stop it or I'll teabag you." This happened in Scotland, And while teabagging is a well-known term in certain parts of Glasgow, and for the older generation, it's used to mean stab multiple times in the chest, he was clearly joking about the whole stabbing thing and it was all part of his sense of humor. But when we finally explained what the meaning behind it was, he was mortified. Something like that nowadays will get you fired was a known story throughout school as well. Last time I saw him I reminded him about it and he cringed so hard. We had a pupil in our computing class called William Cooming, reasonably common name in this part of Scotland. He used to skip class a lot and our teacher, a former religious education teacher, asked a group of 14-15-year-olds if anyone had seen William Cooming in the toilet. She genuinely didn't understand why we were laughing. Back when I used to teach in a high school in New Zealand, this kid from my social studies class goes, "Hey Mr. Kempate, how old is the Queen?" Annoyed that I was disturbed on my thought process and being my first ever time teaching a bunch of kids I accidentally blurted out, "I don't give a frick," which caused the entire class to erupt with laughter. That became the thing they said to me for the next year of my time there. Edit. Was we City College for those interested. The kids always asked me how old the Queen was every lesson. I didn't particularly want to teach, I just did it to go to NZ. But I learned that it's a job for people with way more patience than I can muster. After the first term was over I got put in a different role to change things around and became a woodwork assistant and taught my social studies class to some older kids to help them catch up with what they missed out on. It was great for me because I used to just go surf and my co-teacher of the class would cover for me. Not so much what the teacher said but what was said to her. It was in English class and the teacher, Ms. Kelly, was having people in the class read aloud and switching between people at random to make sure everyone is keeping up and paying attention. Ms. Kelly yawn. Can you continue reading? Yawn starts reading the next line. Of course I will, baby. Ms. Kelly. Thank you. Yawn. Class laughs hysterically. Guy 1. Whining. I have this stupid cough and my throat hurts. Guy 2. Mocking Guy 1. Oh, it hurts when I pee. Teacher. Me. Pointing to Guy 1. That explains your sore throat. Instant regret. The history teacher in our school was telling us about the Kimberley mine, a huge mine where tons of diamonds were found in South Africa. There was this girl named Kimberley and the teacher didn't say Kimberley's mine, she would say Kimberley's hole. She went on saying how big Kimberley's hole was and that a lot of people got sick because of her hole. When she realized people were laughing their faces off, she realized, I haven't seen a face that priceless ever since. Haha, classic. In fairness to the teacher though, the mine in Kimberley is called the Big Hole. Source, South African. We had a chemistry teacher in high school who didn't know what bust a nut was. She basically thought it was having fun or something, so she would say my husband was busting nuts all weekend long. We couldn't get enough. Learned a lot. Had some fun. I had a teacher in grade 6 named Mr. Beta. He said we could call him Sir, Mr., etc. Anything we wanted. He let us call him Master for like a week before realizing his mistake. That is amazing. I taught a class at a community college a few years back as an adjunct and was talking to the students about my attempts to get tickets to the upcoming Adele show. Dean of the school walks in the door for a surprise review just in time to hear me say, who do I have to sleep with to get tickets to this show? Ended up getting a pretty good review, surprisingly. Maybe he had extra tickets and was hoping to get lucky. Our English classes were split up by genders because the boys would often be too embarrassed to talk in front of the girls about emotive subjects in literature. Led to some solid work and discussions being produced, but that was also due to the excellent teacher. A supply teacher took over for one lesson and the entire class was very rowdy and talkative, with the supply unable to even start the lesson plan. She pipes up, "All right boys, let's not have a mass debate." Could not have been any worse. The entire class was hysterical for the rest of the lesson. Would often be too embarrassed to talk in front of the girls about emotive subjects in literature. Pussies. While reading an Anne Bradstreet poem where the line was, "Under the roof no guest shall sit," I said, "Under the roof no guest shall crap." Dang alliteration. It's just impolite to crap under the roof. I was a shotgun instructor at a Boy Scout camp once upon a time. It was raining cats and dogs at the range and it simply wasn't safe to do any shooting. We were huddled under a pavilion and my fellow rangemaster had the bright idea of having the scouts tell us jokes in the hopes that they could make us laugh, and we could give them free tickets for ammunition. Most of the kids in the group were black and one asked if he could tell a black joke. I looked at my fellow instructor and we both sort of shrugged and decided to let the kid proceed. Long story short, the kid's punchline had something to do with black folks hanging from a tree after some form of lynching. I looked at the ground and said that's fricked up. When I looked up, every eye of every kid was as wide as a saucer and they just freaked out that an instructor would swear. The murderously racist joke was no big deal. Saying frick was. In 7th grade we were playing hangman, and we were writing the letters that already had been guessed on the board. After about a minute we had P-O-R-N. After doing paperwork, our 50-year-old male teacher took a gander at the board to yell P, then got red as another teacher poked in to check on us. I am very careful about this when I place hangman. I once had the phrase title bar, computer terminology, and at some point it looked like tit bar. Remove that word from my lineup. Not a teacher, but one day we had a teacher say something along the lines of I'm so tired, I might just fall asleep at the wheel and roll off the road on my way home. 2 girls from our school died the night before in a car accident from rolling off of the road. Holy crap. Serious, people who have cut a parent out of their lives, have you ever regretted it and why? I don't regret my decision. I regret the situation beyond my control. I had a father who was both the best dad and the worst. Like Jekyll and Hyde. He was an amazing provider and funny and fun, but he could also turn and be abusive and mean and terrible. His alcoholism grew over time and worsened the situation, and made for a very unstable childhood. My mom stayed with him and gave him tons of chances, mostly for us kids, but in my teenage years enough was enough and she finally moved on. I thought losing her would be a rock bottom for him, but it wasn't. We split time between our parents while I was in high school and it was pretty awful both ways. By the time I was getting ready to head off to college, I had to finally just cut contact. It was a perfect time for it since I was physically away from my family. In college I had the time of my life away from the toxicity and honestly grew into a better person for it. After graduating I decided to not return to that toxicity. I do miss my dad, sometimes terribly, but my sisters caved and re-established contact from time to time, and it always just hurt them. We all keep hope that eventually, one day he will realize he can still salvage something and he'll get sober and find peace. But I don't hold my breath. He's had so many chances, so many rock bottoms, so much forgiveness from all the people in his life, and each person is driven away eventually. It's crazy. I've been dating my so for years, since college, and I'm getting married next year. He has never met her, nor do I intend for him to meet her. At this point I don't think I'd recognize the man. He wouldn't resemble the father I loved from childhood. Cut my father out. Well, he did it by not really being around for my childhood. I have chosen to continue it throughout my adult life. Only thing I regret is him not being a better person so we could have a relationship of some sort. I know I have missed out in life by not having a father. If the choice was him or no one, I still feel I made the right one. I cut my mom out. Actually it was mutual since she never tried to contact me either. I didn't see or speak to her for over 20 years when I found out she had died. She never knew her grandkids. I'm happy about that. They never were emotionally tortured by her, like everyone here. There's a very long story, but suffice it to say, I never regretted it for a second. Sometimes, I regret cutting my mom out of my life because I still love her and want her to be happy. I'll still never get back in contact with her because she'll never change who she is, an abusive, manipulative woman that's desperate to have people under her control. I understand that she also grew up in an abusive household, and the whole eat or be eaten was how she learned to survive. That's why sometimes, when she does the most fricked up things, I still kind of get why she did it, as unreasonable as it is. Still, just because I understand it doesn't mean I will tolerate it. I can't. She can never form a relationship where two parties are equal, whether it's her children or her own siblings. I can't have a relationship where I won't be treated with respect. Nope. Short answer is they think you can't do it alone in this thing they called cruel world because apparently they know too much about everything and they keep reminding you that you are nothing without them. I guess times have changed and I proved them wrong. Do I regret it? Yes. Every single time I think about it, I regret it. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that I didn't try something else. I regret the way in which I did it. I miss my best friend. I miss watching TV shows together. I miss having someone who recognizes my movie quotes. I miss having a mom. But would I change the fact that I did do it? Absolutely not. Cutting my mother out is probably one of the only things I've ever done in my life that was good for my mental health. It removed a massive amount of doubt, stress, and uncertainty. It removed me from a dangerous, unhealthy environment and put me in a better position to do well in the future. I know it was the right thing for me, and for her too. We're both better off for it, and yet, I don't think I'll ever stop hating myself for it. Sometimes the right decisions are also the hardest. I hope you find peace. My only regret is the occasional times I have to talk to them again. My mother is a narcissist. She would sell anyone out for $1. Cut my birth mother out of my life and I don't regret it one bit. She was verbally and mentally abusive, though she did threaten me with physical violence on multiple occasions. The earliest memory I have of her was when I was maybe 5. We were living with her parents and they were gone for the night. I didn't want her. I wanted my grandmother who had basically been raising me. I was tired and throwing a tantrum like most toddlers do at one point or another. She just sat in the living room and ignored me until she finally snapped. She chased me into my room screaming and red-faced. I climbed up into the top bunk of my bed and over into the corner as she grabbed the frame of the wooden bed and shook the heck out of it, all while screaming horrifying things at me. She ended up ripping the board off the side of the top bunk and leaving. I sat up there crying for I don't know how long, before I climbed down, put on my shoes and went over to a friend of the family who lived up the road, all by myself, in the dark. I stayed there until my grandparents took me home. At 12 I ended up moving back in with my grandparents when she threatened to kill me. And at 16 I was emancipated and ended up moving in with my best friend whose parents adopted me as their own. I have practically zero contact with my blood relatives at this point, unless I bump into them in public, to which I say hi and move on. My mom is the textbook definition of narcissistic personality disorder, and the subreddits here regarding the subject have saved my life. After years of just putting up with her abuse because it was easier to go along with it than to stand up to her, she went just a bit too far. She dramatically decided not to attend my wedding because I invited my sister, who she was fighting with at the time. She tried to get me to say she wasn't invited so that she could be the victim. But for the first time, I wasn't freaking having it. Haven't spoken to her since. She's tried to have mutuals convince me to talk to her, and probably tells everyone how evil and cruel I am to not invite her to my wedding. But I no longer have the capacity to give a crap. That was 2015. And with lots of therapy I've basically had to rebuild my mental state from the ground up. Still struggle with it, but it's so much better. I'm finally healing. If you're having trouble going no contact, this phrase helped me so much. You can't heal in the same environment that made you sick. I have regretted not being able to do it sooner. It still haunts me that I could have left, or went to the police or told the school, but I felt like nobody cared. They do have to care because it's the law. My abusive mother still stalks me to this day, and my report done this year, I'm 22 now, about all she did when I was younger got rejected because I didn't bring any proof. I still have nightmares. I have PTSD. They do have to care because it's the law. In theory that's true. In practice sometimes it isn't, unfortunately. I cut out my father. He was never around when I was young and I met him when I was 14. I'm now 22. He would contact me on FB occasionally, but it would almost always end in an argument. He pretended and acted like he wanted a relationship with me, but his true intentions were to obtain information from me about his other child, his son, my bro from another mother, who has a DVO 5 years restraining order against him. When he realized he wasn't getting any info, he was cold and callous, telling me he doesn't have time to reply to FB messages as he's busy with his life act. Mind you, it's the only way we have to form any sort of relationship, so it was clear he wasn't serious about us reconnecting at all. The cherry on the cake for me though was when he said to me, "You're an adult. You don't need a father imo." That's his cop-out excuse not to be there. The pure arrogance was enough to make my brain explode. He has also missed out on being a grandfather, as I have an almost 2-year-old little girl. Growing up without a father, I never knew what to expect from one. Seeing my partner with our daughter was the first time I had seen how proper father and daughter relationship interactions are. It's a blessing. Every day since her birth I have had the privilege of watching him, my partner, love her, our daughter. I now know this is how a father is supposed to be. This is when I knew I didn't and wouldn't ever have a dad. So I blocked him, my father, on FB and don't care what the future holds. When I look at my daughter, I couldn't imagine not being a part of her life. At 2 years old or 102, I will always love and be there for my baby girl, and I pray our relationship is never tainted. At first, maybe a little bit. When you do something like that after a lifetime of emotional abuse, you start to have dreams that maybe they weren't so bad and that you were just overreacting. Your brain carries on gaslighting you in their absence, and it makes you start to wonder if you did something wrong by cutting them off. You wonder what you lost, what you might be missing out on, whether it's healthy to try and live a life without family or parental figures in your life, even highly toxic ones. Now, though, I'm more myself than I ever was when I was trying to make our relationship work. I still have a lot of the baggage and symptoms of abuse, like apologizing for everything or raising my voice reflexively if a conversation gets heated. But now I don't have to apologize for everything. I can just be. Now I don't have to be on the defensive about every decision I make. I can just make decisions. I don't have to constantly justify myself to anyone for any reason. I'm just myself. I'm way more passionate about the things I love because I can love them openly. I'm way more outspoken because I found my voice and reclaimed it. And I can let myself be proud of my achievements knowing that they had nothing to do with it, and can't try and steal my thunder because they happened to birth me some 32 years ago. If I had the opportunity to turn the clock back, the only change I'd make is I would cut them off far sooner. Never regretted it and probably never will. I feel so much better not having my dad in my life. I still get extremely anxious if I go to places that have a high risk of running into him or his side of the family, which I cut off at the same time. Me too, man. Me too. Haven't regretted it yet. Cut my dad out of my life a couple years ago and it's literally the best decision I've ever made. I'm living my best life and I'm no longer suicidal. He was mentally and physically abusive, as well as extremely controlling, my entire life. And even getting a random text from him was enough to send me into a panic attack. Frick people who tell abuse victims that family is important and you should forgive and forget. If my spouse treated me even a little bit the way my dad did, he would be in jail. So if you're asking this question because you're considering it, I say go for it. Father, I almost don't know that guy, so not a bit. Mother, her alcoholism is far beyond what I can help without destroying myself too. So it depends. My life is definitely better, but did I have the right to have my own life and not sacrifice it for her? I ask that myself from time to time, but mostly, no, I do not regret it. Jeez, it's like reading a teaser to my relationship with both of my parents. Father never was there, and my mom too busy to care drinking. After I cut them both out, I finally feel I have control over my life and stopped caring over things I can't fix. The only thing I don't like is that my son is growing up without his grandparents. From time to time regret pops up. He wasn't the worst parent, but the first memory I have of him was him beating me for tearing up after I broke my wrist at age 5. The last memory of him was him threatening to beat me at my 25th birthday party, then later throwing a 4-inch thick medical binder at the back of my head. Cutting him out was justified. Then he died 3 years later and there's some lingering regret. I cut both of my parents and my brother out of my life after the death of my first child. I don't regret it. I do feel sad about it, as is normal. I get angry about it still even years later, and that's natural. I have had attempts from each of them to reach out to me, but I also know I am the black sheep blamed for my family tearing itself apart. But I had to survive. My brother didn't even show up to the funeral, and Facebook auto check-in told me exactly where he was. As for my parents, cornering one of my friends at the wake and yelling at her because they were not involved enough in the funeral is just one of many things. I can still remember the moment at the funeral where they took my son's casket out after the service. I lost it, just completely broke down in front of everyone. My wife tried to console me, other unrelated people around me too. My mom jumped back about 10 feet in horror, and my dad got mad at me because I wasn't going and everyone there was waiting for me to go. I cut them off. It was hard, but I'm better for it now. My kids know I have parents and they've met them at 2 subsequent funerals, where mom and dad also tried to start crap. My kids don't know about my brother except for his favorite Ninja Turtle and Transformer. I have no desire to rebuild these relationships. Nope. My father is a toxic drunk. He gets near violent and gets very verbally abusive. I'm glad he's out of my life. Now if only my grandparents would stop pestering me about giving him a billionth chance. I regret not having done it 13 years earlier when I had the chance then. Yes, I did find it again that 13 years later. I wish I could go back and do so to see how differently my life would have gone. I cut my mother out of my life. Growing up, I thought her mentally, sometimes physically, abusive behavior was normal, or to be honest, I excused a lot of her actions away as having had a very troubled childhood herself. I was a good kid. In high school I had a part-time job to pay all my school fees. I was on a roll, never broke curfew, didn't drink, smoke or do drugs, and my friends were good girls just like me. But she was mentally unstable and kicked me out at 17. I was just 2 months into my senior year of high school. We did reconcile a few years later, but leopards don't change their spots, and reconcile means I was tricked by a family member into thinking she wanted to talk to me, see me. No apologies were given, no admittance of fault, so life went on. A decade and a half went by. I got married, and after a struggle with infertility, became pregnant. Baby was born 1/2 weeks early, but okay. We got through the first year of new parenthood and wanted to throw a party for our daughter's first birthday. Well, the crap had been brewing and she tried with all her might to tear all her kids apart from each other. Balls ensued, and before I knew it, I was getting calls saying she would not come to the party if my brother, her firstborn, was there. The black sheep, who is, you know, a doctor. So instead of spending my energy on the first party I was ever throwing, I had to deal with Bull's family drama, and she ended up not coming to her first granddaughter's first birthday. She missed my high school graduation, my brother's graduation from medical school, same brother's wedding reception, he eloped, and my daughter's first birthday, all for petty butt reasons. She tried so hard to fracture the family, and she succeeded. She died 7 years after I went NC. When I found out she was sick, I made 3 attempts to see her. My attempts were rebuffed and I received a hate-filled 3-page letter from her, listing all my transgressions. No joke, she listed the fact that I once told her to shut up when I was 15. She died not having contact with 2 of her 4 kids, and not having met 3 of her 8 grandchildren. I have 0 regrets. I had long since grieved for the mother I craved but never had. The stupidest thing is, I didn't even need much. A simple "I'm sorry for letting you down" would have sufficed. But she could never admit fault, and I never once heard her apologize for anything, ever. For me personally, no, I do not regret it. I cut my mother out of my life. She was, and still is, a truly dangerous, psychotic, cruel and awful human being. My younger sister, however, continues to struggle with it. She asks me a lot of questions about why and how I came to that decision. She keeps trying to connect with our mother, and gets met with heartbreak and disappointment every single time. My sister initially didn't fully want to believe me when I made that decision. She's only now starting to see exactly how awful our mother truly is. It's equal parts cathartic and completely heartbreaking for me to watch. I think that's my biggest regret, that I didn't step in enough and prepare my sister for dealing with the horror that is our mother. Father-in-law, and not really, learned later that the hatred was mutual, as he was actually trying to get rid of me. He was a complete C, and never interacted positively, or even neutrally with the family. Sometimes, People just have a complete negative influence on your life, and it's nice to become an adult and be able to choose who is and isn't in your social group. He died a couple years afterwards, and I didn't attend the funeral. I didn't wish him any particular ill will, but if I can do him a wrong turn, I will, but in a psychologically healthy non-obsessed way. OFC. I cut my dad out of my life. When my parents divorced when I was 8, he lied and manipulated me to the point where I deeply despised my mother for absolutely no reason other than naivete. He approached my bedroom door with a gun to his head, threatening to kill himself in front of me. When I started to cry and freak out, he laughed at me and said it was just a joke. I'm now traumatized around guns. He was horrible, emotionally abusive. When my grandmother died, her funeral was the day I was at his house. I had to go to that funeral. I loved her, but he had the audacity to offer me $200 to not go and then go on to yell at me for being weak and wanting to go to a funeral. When my best friend since childhood commits suicide, he called me worthless for crying. Freshman year of school, I finally came to my senses and realized the horrible one was my dad and not my mom. My mom and I now have an amazing relationship, and I officially haven't spoken to my dad in a year. Went LC with both of my parents for a bunch of reasons. Mostly it's that they had this concept of me as a weak person who had lost all of her potential and would never get her life together. No matter what I did, I couldn't earn their respect, and at the same time I couldn't live with being treated as a frick up. I'm not a frick up. I'm a good person and a good wife, and I have something to contribute. But I was a difficult child and teenager, and they refused to reassess the way they thought about me. Do I regret it? I regret that it has to be this way, but I tried and tried for so many years, and eventually I just couldn't do it anymore. My mom was my best friend, but what good is a best friend if they make you feel like crap about yourself all the time? I think the biggest mistake that good parents make is having a fixed idea of who their child is before that child is grown. People change so much throughout the first 30 years of life. You need to have a flexible concept of who that person is. My sperm donor is your typical deadbeat butthole. He didn't show up until I was 12. Found out way later that it was his brother who put him up to it, so his brother basically forced him to be a man and own up to his actions. Still waiting for that to happen. He never spent a cent on me, just expected his wife, my stepmom and the real parent, to take care of it, but would claim credit for doing it. And whenever I did visit, it was mostly just to clean his house, babysit my sisters, which I didn't really mind, and parade me around like a trophy for his side of the family, who just saw me as the bastard, like we were all so happy and perfect. The last straw was when my own sister told me about a conversation from his own mouth about how glad he was that my mom can't go after him for child support anymore now that I was of age. Funny how he never bothered to learn my age before then, or after for that matter, but as soon as it's tied to him not paying any more money, he is all knowing AF. The cherry on top is when he told her that apparently the reason I didn't have a father for those first 12 years of my life is because my mother was controlling and smoked weed. Newsflash. Butthole. Not wanting to entertain your balls, like sleeping with other women, is called standing up for herself. Just because she wasn't trying to one-up some other bee who was clearly trying to buy your affections doesn't make her anything but a smart butt woman, and makes you a mooching butt piece of dog shit. The part about her smoking weed is hilarious and pathetic, in part because he failed to mention that he was the one who brought the weed to her house, rolled it up right in front of her, and they smoked together. But sure, blame it all on her to make yourself look better. BTW, my mother told me all of this because she wasn't ashamed. She just couldn't believe he would lie like that. I brought this all up to him when he called himself trying to reconcile with me, and he of course deflected, but wouldn't outright deny it. So I told him when he was ready to fess up in front of his daughters, his wife and my mother, and admit that he is a lying, useless sperm donor, I would never talk to him again. He tried defying me by just showing up to my house and yelling my name, and after letting his dumb ass stand there like a freaking moron for about 20 minutes in the hot sun, I called his wife and informed her that if he didn't leave, I would call the cops on him, and would do so if he ever showed up again, unless he was willing to accept my terms. To this day, I have not seen or heard anything from him, and I hope it stays that way. At this point, the man could die, and I would not give a frick in the slightest. I do miss my stepmom and my baby sister though. My dad is a retired cop with confirmed mental illness. As a kid I saw him freak out and do crazy stuff I knew was wrong when I was 5 years old. He hit my teenage cousin and got kicked out of my aunt's home. On my 13th birthday I said frick off to a kid who told my dad. My dad beat the crap out of me at a busy campground and adults just stood and watched. Not one person tried to stop him. Then the police showed up, said if my dad goes I go because my stepmom didn't want me there. About 10 years ago my mom was selling a house for me. She forged my name on some documents and they sent her the proceeds for around $90,000 she cashed. I didn't report the money because I was told my mom didn't get a commission from the sale and she did me a favor selling it. I was upside down. I got a $130k tax lien filed against me and all the notices were being sent to my mom's old home address. I don't talk to either of my parents. My life seems like a freaking mess. Everything goes wrong all the time. My parents are doing great. My sister already asked they leave her and her kids everything when they die since I chose not to be part of the family. Yeah, my dad. Is so emotionally stunted that he would go months without calling back only to be rage drunk when he would. I cut him off for a year, told him I was, and told his wife. A year later a sober and meek father came and hugged me. Sucked, but he got the point. Girls of Reddit, did you ever have a guy that you wished you said yes to when he asked you out? What is the story? One time I said no because I was too busy with my exams. I had my head buried in my books when he asked me. The timing was all wrong. I regret saying no. Had a guy ask me out in high school. Really fun guy. Very nice, funny, athletic, smart, and good looking. I turned him down because I knew he had already had sex, and I wasn't ready to have sex at that time. It wasn't about his morals. I did desperately want to date him, but I just felt like I would never be able to make him happy, and I was embarrassed that I hadn't had sex. A few years later in college I ran into him when I was home on break. He's still the perfect guy, hasn't changed a bit. I screwed the pooch on that one. Using this as an example, all guys want to have sex, but if you're not ready for it and just want to date then still say yes. You should be able to build a healthy relationship without sex. Then eventually you can get to the point where you have ravenous sex every night after a good day together. Had a very close friend in high school who really liked me for years. I was his prom date and all, but when he started to want to be more than friends, I was really hesitant, so I said no and distanced myself, even though I knew I should have said yes. Long story short, I'm Sikh and was rebelling against my parents' wishes to be with a practicing Sikh. Such a stupid reason. We stayed friends though. In college, I started to like him even more, but we both had so's. I kept thinking of telling him how I felt, but I kept these feelings in my head all throughout college without saying anything, and instead stayed with my douchebag of a so. And then when I was getting close to admitting everything to him, he passed away while on vacation with his family. Well, that turned dark fast. Two guys come to mind. Guy 1 was so sweet, and I did like him, but he was going too fast for my liking, saying I love you too soon, etc. He somehow lost heart in pursuing a relationship with me when I told him to slow down as it was making me uncomfortable. We rekindled our thing a few years later, but it wasn't quite the same and it didn't amount to anything serious. He's now in a long distance relationship with a beautiful girl. From what I can see from the outside of their relationship, he's a very sweet and devoted boyfriend. I sometimes think I missed out. Guy 2 was someone I really liked, but he was always talking to about other girls, so I didn't think he liked me that much. One day, he asked if I'll go out with him, but it was set up to seem like a joke, so I said no. That's ridiculous because I didn't want to appear too eager and vulnerable. I found out later that he was serious but he wanted to seem casual. This happened in high school, hence all these stupid games. He had moved on to other girls by the time I found out, and went into a relationship with this girl. She was his first girlfriend. When they broke up, it devastated him. Then sometime after, we got together. I was his rebound, so it was doomed from the start as he wasn't over her. I thought that if I had said yes to him when he asked me the first time, I would have been his first and he would have loved me that much. Hence all these stupid games. Oh ho ho ho. They can go well into adulthood. My grandma just told me this story. In high school, She met this guy. He was very intelligent, fairly good looking and greatly humorous. She really liked him and she was very aware that he likes her as well. So one day, he finally asks her out and she rejects him. My grandma continues to say about how he turned out so well with money and a really nice life. So I asked her, well, why did you reject him? And her exact words were, I couldn't date a ginger. Ah, old people. I did this event at the Queen Mary and could not stop staring at this guy. I just thought he was the most gorgeous thing on the planet. My event coordinator noticed and ended up bringing him over the last night when they had a ball. We walked around the deck and when I told him how I had slipped and almost fell, he's like swooped me into a dip and said like this he tried to teach me how to dance, which he was great at. Told me about how he traveled and loved school and all the same things as me. It was the best, most romantic night of my life. I had to go back to my group and he stopped me on the stairs to kiss me and said, this is the last chance I am going to have to do this. What do you want me to do? I told him I needed him to keep walking because at the time I was in an on-again off-again relationship with a total scumbag. I think about him all the time and beat myself up a lot for passing on someone so great for someone who didn't care about me. If I could redo one thing in my life, it'd be that night. Damn it. I think I watched this with my mom on Lifetime or Hallmark. Crappy mental health. Don't feel like I could have a healthy relationship because of it. Back in my teens, my self-esteem was so low it was easier to believe otherwise really nice guys were trying to make fun of me rather than that they were actually interested. Some of them were guys I had crushes on for years. Yay. Not really regretting, but I wish I had been someone else that could have given him a chance. He was all shy and cute and seemed like a genuinely good person. It was in the train, but I was in love with somebody else. Frick this gay earth. Well, there was this one guy who I served at the register I was working at who seemed nice and normal. He came back later and handed me his number and I sort of wonder what would have happened if I called it. I lost the number but I remember his name and know he probably lives in the area. In 4th grade, a boy passed me a note asking me whether I'd be his girlfriend. Circle yes or number. I was caught off guard, but my friend sitting next to me wasn't. I believe she said you. Rip it up, and I did. He was a nice kid. I should have circled yes, and I really shouldn't have ripped it up. That was very rude of me. Sorry, Jeremy. That would tear any person's heart apart. I hope Jeremy stayed strong. It was freshman year of college. I made eye contact with some random guy from across the quad. He walked over, sat next to me, and we had a short conversation. He invited me to his room before my friends showed up and dragged me away. Turned out we lived in the same building. I went to his room, and we talked and joked as though we'd known each other our entire lives. And constantly, this kick-butt engineer student was complimenting me, the mediocre biology kid, on how smart I was. He and I ran into each other several times, and there was always a palpable tension between us. But I was in a long-distance relationship at the time and I never went for it. I turned down the only guy to ever give me butterflies in my stomach and make me smile like an idiot. This one made the saddest. I hope you find someone that makes you feel like that again, and don't settle for someone that doesn't give you that feeling. Sort of, because he never asked directly, like, he hinted at it enough that I really should have gotten the picture, but I wasn't thinking about starting anything because I was moving 4 states away in less than a week. It's 3 months later and I still think about what could have been sometimes. I had the same mindset. I'm leaving in 2 months. Why should we even start something? We're 6 months together. It's a fault D. My main motivation for acquiring fame and wealth and muscles is to put a lot of girls into the situation you describe. That's healthy, right? You do what you gotta do to get the gains, and find your swallow maiden. My mom was waiting for this guy to get off stage so she could interview him for Buddy magazine, when this little weird guy comes over and asks her out. Her actual words were he was way too ugly. I was just too good for him. After I asked her why, she shut him down. The guy turned out to be Stevie Ray Vaughan. She said that when the guy she was waiting for finally got off stage, the little guy got up and did a couple of songs. She instantly regretted treating him like that and tried to talk to him afterward. He told her I wasn't good enough for you before I played and nothing's changed. Glad he had some self-respect. Till that, girls will still say no to being asked out even if they like you and are available. So remember, no matter how much you think she likes you, asking her out is still just like starting a hardest difficulty game of Minesweeper on the smallest map. It really does boggle the mind. I worked for several years with Harry. We had a lot of fun at work and also went out surfing, beach days, mutual friend stuff together too. Only gradually did I realize I was developing genuine feelings for him. I kept all this to myself, of course. He seemed way out of my league and I didn't want to make our work relationship awkward. Once he asked me if I'd go shopping with him to find some shoes. We went to the mall, found some kicks, and then he asked me if I wanted lunch. I said nah. I wanted to work out before work, so see you later. Didn't understand he was maybe asking me to lunch as a date until much later. Idiot. We continued to work together and hang as friends though, and we both dated other people. Eventually he left the job to travel and finish school, but still came by to hang out. One night we were all drinking and we went out back to share a smoke. We were pretty drunk, and I was sitting on this raised box thing and he stood in front of me and placed his hands on my knees, looked into my eyes and said tinfoil heartiput, "I love you." I've never been able to say this before. I love you. I've loved you a long time. And I said, oh okay, handed him the smoke and went back inside. I didn't know how to reply. I had inklings that he had feelings for me, but we never came out and said it. I had a boyfriend at the time and wouldn't cheat. So, here I am. Harry, if you read this, I love you too. TL. DR. Worked for years with my possible soulmate. He confessed his love and I choked like a fool. Even I got hurt just by reading this. Poor guy. At an end of summer party, this nice guy gave me his number. I was very shy and kept putting off calling him because I was nervous. Then I got caught up in the excitement of starting my first year at university and I honestly just forgot about it. Passed him months later in the hallway at university and he gave me this incredibly wounded puppy dog look and kept walking. I felt terrible. I hadn't thought it was a big deal for him. I know now it's pretty much always a big deal for a guy to work up that courage. In high school I had a huge crush on this guy, but he was one of the popular guys and I wasn't. But as luck would have it, we sat beside each other in SOF English and he must have thought I was pretty funny because he was laughing at my jokes. Fast forward to the end of the year. He and his GF broke up and after class we held hands all the way to the bus stop. I was so friggin' shy that I bolted when he tried to kiss me. We didn't talk much afterwards. I regret being shy. Nobody is ever happy about how shy they once were. I said no to a perfectly lovely guy who was just my type once because I was feeling a bit down and not like I could deal with the world of romance. I mentioned this to my best friend in passing one day and it transpired that they knew each other. My best friend managed to dig me out of my shell enough to at least go out for a quick drink with him. 2 years later I walked down the aisle towards him. We're now fulfilling a lifelong dream of mine by living in another country together and have a life full of love and adventure planned. Obviously I'd never have known this to regret it, but it's incredible to think how different my life would be if I'd stuck with my original no. I hate this story. It has a happy ending. Enjoy my upvote. No. Can't say I said no to anyone who asked. Did I wish I had just grabbed that brown-eyed idiot who was in all my classes and told them how I felt? Yes, with my whole being. Grabbing people by the eyeballs is generally seen as a bad move. Well, it looks like I need to cancel my plans and desperately search this thread for women who I perceive to have wronged me. Thanks Reddit. So I am actually the guy in this story, but once I asked a girl in a chem lab at college out. Turned out she had a boyfriend, but her smile when I asked her was bigger than I've seen from girls who said yes. Wow, I can't believe how relevant this is to my situation. Throwaway just in case he or a friend recognizes this post. Don't want the surprise to be ruined. I had a really good friend in high school who, to put it lightly, was a man W. We were really close. He would tell me everything about his sexual escapades with a variety of girls, some I knew and some who were much older. Despite all these conversations, I started to fall for him. Underneath his reputation was someone kind and loving to all his friends. He was the type who would do anything for anyone. He was a great father figure to his younger siblings and was essentially the man of the house. Junior year, He revealed that he was starting to like me. He asked if I would be his date to our friend's annual New Year's party, but I was an assuming, ignorant bee, and I brushed it off. I was hurt that he would try to get in my pants. I thought I meant more to him than just another girl to mess around with. I never told him how I felt about him. Instead, I cut off ties with him. I started to distance myself from him little by little with no explanation. He would try to talk to me, but I would try my hardest to avoid him altogether. I went away to college and he stayed in our hometown. After too much time thinking, I realized what I did was immature. Recently, we have started talking again and I apologized for being a huge bee. He told me he knew I'd come around again, but I'm happy to know he really does care for me still. He doesn't know it, but I'm going back home tonight for Christmas. I plan on surprising him. I'm going to ask him to be my date to the New Year's party our friend has every year. Frick yes, this is crap guys dream about. A guy asked out a girl I work with a while back. She said no, very rudely. She's very materialistic. Certainly a gold digger. That guy ended up being Luke Wilson, tight end for the Super Bowl champion Seattle Seahawks. She is very regretful. Good, she deserves to be if she's a gold digger. Well, I met a beautiful Italian architect when I was studying abroad. He kept in touch over Facebook. As soon as I was single again, he sent me a message telling me that he would pay for my flight to Vienna where his parents live. Then we would move to his flat in Paris. I said no. My education was too important. He got married to a gorgeous Russian girl a couple months later. Their wedding was straight out of a fairy tale. I would make the same decision again, but dang if I don't wonder what my life would be like. I'm a guy, speaking for a girl, but this story always breaks my heart. I asked a girl out while she was a waitress at a pizza place. She agreed to go out as friends and I spent the next 6 months plus politely picking her up, taking her to lunch or dinner and doing my best to not pressure her away from me. I was in the friend zone with no signs of escaping. My boss gave me great tickets to go see the SF Giants at Candlestick Park, so I invited her. She agreed. Neither of us were baseball fans, but it seemed like it would be a great experience. It wasn't. It was freezing. We had no idea what was happening, and when I suggested we leave, she agreed. I drove her home, and as I was walking her to the door I grasped her hand. The first time we had held hands, she yanked her hand back. I remember the words very clearly: "It's too fast." Okay, message received. She had moved a distance away from me, so I let things go. I stopped calling her and she made no effort to contact me. Goodbye, Deborah. Several years later I had met somebody else and had actually become engaged. I got a phone call from Deborah. She was hoping to get together. I told her that I was in a serious relationship, so perhaps it wasn't a good idea. We chit-chatted a bit and said our goodbyes. A week or so later I got a card from her explaining how much she regretted pushing me away and that she considered me the one that got away. The funny things is that I was so madly in love with her. To this day I think of her. My wife is amazing and I am so very lucky, but I always wonder what would have happened. Hey, dude, you've likely been at the receiving end of a documented psychological phenomenon called mate poaching. The name speaks for itself, although the reasons behind it appear not to be conscious. Women and, to some extent, men both exhibit these behaviors. Don't worry, there's probably no real magic you're missing out on, huh? In college there was a guy who asked me out who was weird and annoying, so I said no. Next year he came back hot as frick. Turns out he spent all summer working out. I regretted it until I invited him over one night and he stole my PS3 and my Yoda backpack. Be right back working out for a year. In high school I was asked to go to homecoming by this great guy. I said no because I couldn't afford a dress. I was too embarrassed to tell him or anyone else about it. He ended up going with someone else and I always regretted not being able to go. I wish I could have said yes. This is my wife's story, but it involves me. We were high school sweethearts and shortly after we started dating she was asked to go to a school dance by Larry Fitzgerald. She turned him down, noting she had a boyfriend. When she told me about it that evening she was surprised to hear my reaction, which was that she freaking blew it. At this point, Larry was already an athletic freak. Even in the 10th or 11th grade it was clear this guy was going on to big things. As life progressed and my wife and I started a family, Larry's career progressed and he continued to excel. I would occasionally remark to my gal that Larry had just hit another milestone, killing it at Pitt, winning awards and so on. When the draft approached and he was projected as a top 3 pick, I again pointed out that she blew it. She would always respond with, "But I was with you," or "He was kinda weird anyway." When he was selected 3rd by the Cards, I again pointed out how she blew it. She shrugged it off. A couple weeks later I walk into the kitchen and she's holding the sports page. I ask what she's reading and she just says, "I freaking blew it," handed me the paper and walked away. The headline said something along the lines of "Fitzgerald agrees a $60 million contact." He didn't ask me out, but we were super close. It was obvious that we both liked each other, until my friends and I were playing a game where you would have to say who you preferred to date more in the group of friends. It was my turn, and I jokingly said another guy. Of course he was so shocked, and it was only a few days later that I realized my dumb mistake. I was so frustrated at myself that I didn't talk to him for a long time. We talk a bit now, but he has a girlfriend. So much regret. TL. DR. Don't be afraid to tell the truth. I was so frustrated at myself that I didn't talk to him for a long time. Girl logic. Yes, I knew this guy back in elementary, and since we've kept a Facebook connection after I moved away, I was in 4th or 5th grade and he came up to my door, rang it, to ask me out to the movies. I was astonished that he would and I wanted to, but I was so embarrassed, I slammed the door on him. If I hadn't slammed the door, maybe he wouldn't have turned gay. 2 guys, both named Brandon. The timing for both was bad. Brandon 1 confessed his crush for me at the end of his senior and my junior year. Brandon 2 confessed after I just broke up with my boyfriend of a year, and I wasn't ready to jump into another relationship. The outcomes for both ended up being the same. We were never single again at the same times. As a guy I've done this. It's 6th grade. I was one of the goofy weird types. Good looking, preppy cheerleader type girl asked me to a dance. I said no, and was convinced that she was just trying to make fun of me. Maybe not full on pig's blood dumped on me, but you get the idea. She kept asking the rest of the day and I kept being a stubborn prick. I still wonder to this day if she honestly wanted to dance with me. I worked in a library for a while where you were required to wear name tags that somehow represented your real name. I didn't feel comfortable with my first name, so I put my middle name on it. I talked to a really nice guy for about an hour and recommended a bunch of books to him. He came in a week later to ask if middle name was working. The lady at the circulation desk told him that no one by that name worked there. I never saw him again. He seemed like a really great guy. He never asked my name and I never asked him that first day. He probably thought I had lied to him. I'm sitting here reading this and wondering if any of the 30 girls I asked out ever regretted saying no. Have never gotten a yes yet either. Whoa, 30 girls. My self-esteem got destroyed when I got rejected by one. You're a bigger man than I am. It was my sophomore year of college, and I had a boyfriend. A nice enough guy but a total stoner without an ounce of ambition. He was away on a weekend get stoned with my buddy's trip, and I was bored and walking across campus to the student union building. It was a cold, blustery weekend, and it was honest to God like something out of a rom-com. I dropped a stack of papers and they started blowing around, and up runs the football player dude who'd been flirting with me off and on in one of my classes. He asked me if I wanted to go get some coffee for my poor, freezing hands, and I said what the heck. We opted for cocoa instead, and sat there for nearly 2 hours. It turns out he was an honors student and only played football to get the scholarship he needed. He was funny and really smart and so freaking gorgeous. I couldn't believe he was talking to me. He told me he came to see all my shows. I was a theater major, and he finally asked if he could see me again, really see me, and I wanted to say yes so badly, but I also couldn't cheat on my boyfriend either. I turned him down, and he told me if I changed my mind, to let him know. I ended up staying with Stoner Boy for another few months, and by then football dude had a girlfriend. I looked him up on Google once a few years back. He ended up becoming a doctor. He chairs a Special Olympics committee in his hometown and he seems like he's still a terrific guy. He'll always be one I wish I could go back and say yes to. If there's one takeaway message on this thread, it's to not stay with someone you don't really want to be with. He never exactly asked me out, but this dude, let's call him Dylan, and I were dance partners in the 3rd grade. Dylan was sweet but I only had eyes for Patrick. In high school Dylan had become Greek statue level hot and confessed that he'd always had a crush on me. I was already dating someone else and dang I missed out. What's your biggest regret and why? I got persuaded to go to Australia with a guy I was dating. It was a 3-month trip where we were living with his family the whole time. He told me he saw no future with me when we were on the flight over. Longest 3 months of my life, haha. But hey, you've been to Australia. I hope that at least you have some memories to cherish from this trip. I declined a job with Blizzard Entertainment in Austin, TX because I didn't want to live in Texas. I was working for them through an outsource company, and they offered to pay relocation for me and everything. 3 years later and I'm in the US Army because of the recession, and I'm stationed at Featuring Hood, an hour away from Austin. Frick me. Credentials don't go away, it's never too late to apply again. Dropping out of college in '94 after 2 years. My parents were paying for school that time, but when I returned in '97, I was married. My first kid was born the second day back at uni. I was working full-time graveyard shift. I had to take school at 1, 2, 3, 4 time. I had to take out tons in loans to help afford the family, which all combined to me having serious college debt and graduating in 2003 instead of '96. What was supposed to be a 1-year break to live life a little turned into a lot more. Don't drop out of school without a serious plan to return. Years ago I pushed away people that I cared a lot about. It still hurts to see them on social media all the time and even talk with them once in a while, because we all know that it's never gonna be the same. At least we have the memories. I push people away all the time, not because I hate them, but more like I hate myself, and I need to be alone. This quote from BoJack Horseman where he is talking to himself explains it better. You're a real stupid piece of crap, and everywhere you go you destroy people. You screw up. You're making your daughter hate you, which is good, because look what happens when people love you. Not working as hard as I could have from as early as I should have. I feel like I've lost years from my life and it sucks. I procrastinate like crazy during the first few years in university and I got my degree at 25 and with crappy grades. And that mentality also kinda cost me a great relationship as well. I should have worked much harder at it too. All the things I didn't tell my sister before she died. Not telling her I loved her every day, that she wasn't a burden to me or my family for being born with a cocktail of fed up diagnoses in her head like depression and GAD, that she didn't need to apologize in her last letter to us, that it's okay for her to pass on and be happier in whatever life comes next. It's been more than 2.5 years since she did it and we're all doing okay, but dang. I'd give anything to tell her I love her one last time. I'd gladly give my life and all I have in a blink of an eye. If you can read this I'm okay and I'll be okay, but dang, I miss you more than words can say. I love you sis. Well, that's powerful. Sorry for your loss. I regret never finding out more about my dad's earlier life. I know he used to be in the RAF and was stationed in Singapore. I know he was a keen cyclist and had been in many races around the world. I know he was a semi-pro bowler, but I don't know the specifics of anything. He was taken ill early in 2015 and diagnosed with cancer. Died Christmas 2015. When the local vicar visited to talk to us about his funeral service, his questions brought me to tears. Where was your dad born? I don't know. Where did he go to school? I don't know. What did he do when he left school? I don't know. It really hit home and made me realize how little I actually knew about my dad's life prior to me being born. I know he used to be in the RAF and was stationed in Singapore. He definitely had a mustache if that's any help. Staying in a relationship for 3 more years. After the first incidents of domestic violence, it just got worse and worse and worse until one day it was just too much. I had to go to protect myself. In the first months after I left, I blamed myself for what happened. In fact, a small part of me still does. Years later, I am still suffering the emotional and psychological consequences of my decision to tolerate my insistence that my love would prevail over the inexcusable entitlement of an increasingly toxic and violent person who thought of me as largely incidental to their narcissistic desire for fame and success. Me, who loved them more than I ever thought possible, reduced to a far too little speed bump on their road to self-fulfillment. To a far too literal punching bag they used day in and day out to resolve their deep-seated insecurities. The thing is, I find it is cold comfort for me to say to myself that they are being punished on the daily for what they did by their own warped and tormented ego. But I don't want them to be punished. I want them to be healthy and happy and whole. But I can't be the one to give them that. No one can but them. Yet they are the type to ignore that reality, and to keep trying to take it from me and any other unfortunate empath they lure in with their outwardly earnest desire to be better. I am glad I got out at all, but I regret not getting out sooner. But most of all, I regret that the world is full of people who would do such things to the people they love. I was going to buy a few $100s in Bitcoin and hope for an investment return, but my friend needed to borrow $50 and that made me think nah, probably isn't worth it. We still bring it up to this day. Remember that time you would have been super rich if I didn't borrow some money off you? Yep. That's depressing. Yep. Not asking her out, and missing my chance permanently. She's in another country now with a boyfriend and I'm still here meandering through life with a lot of anxiety and loneliness. A tale as old as time, yet it makes the pill no less bitter to swallow. I was actually browsing Reddit hoping to get my mind off her and lo and behold I find this thread. I really miss you. Heartfelt words from a tormented anus. My dad got me into go-karting when I was young. Started racing when I was 8 years old as I was obsessed with Formula 1 and wanted to race in F1 when I grew up. Got approached by a team who wanted me to race for them when I was 14, which I did. By this time I had already won multiple club championships and won big race meetings and held the lap record in my class at 2 tracks, which I still hold to this day, and raced for them for a year with 95% of expenses paid for. I was given all of their latest equipment and tech, but eventually saying just before I turned 16 that I had no interest. All I wanted to do was race, but I had just got a girlfriend and puberty got the better of me. That was my opportunity to get somewhere in life through racing as everything was going so well. That team now is very successful here in the UK and now I'm 21. It is the only regret in my life. That could have been not going to a therapist earlier. Knowing about my problems would have given me a fun college time. I could have experienced way more stuff than I did. Cause I would have been able to talk to people and work around the stuff I just don't understand have. I mean, my freaking mother could have told me that a screw is loose, but hey, just throw that sucker into the world, what might go wrong? Not hugging her. I was sad to leave and I thought that if I could act like I didn't care then it wouldn't hurt so much. I hired my best friend when he lost his job. My blood family is not a part of my life. He was my family. We ate together. He had a key to my house. He'd drop by all the time, like an episode of Seinfeld. I loved him as family. I bent over backwards to support him. He pushed boundaries until he was outright stealing money. I suspect he had a drug problem. I had to fire him. I had no choice. The last time I saw his face was when I fired him and gave him money out of my pocket to get him by. He demanded more, threatened me, spewed venomous statements. On his way out he turned to say something spiteful and I interrupted and wished him good luck and he left. I have never seen him since. Don't mix friendship and business. When I was little I was a stupid little crap, and I told my mum I loved my dad more than her. I regret that so much. I was stupid and didn't mean it. Not taking more pictures with my grandparents. 3 of them have died now and at all 3 funerals. They have been slideshows of pictures of the past and memories. I noticed that I wasn't in a lot of pictures while the rest of my family members had, which seemed like I didn't connect well with the elderly. In fact, that is not true. I just prefer to enjoy the moment and not take pictures of everything. Same goes for concerts. Sure, I do make video here and there to show my parents where I've been and what I'm up to, but mostly I am there for myself or someone else. So when we remember my grandparents, I don't have many pictures where the both of us are on, and it seems like I am a grandchild that doesn't give a dang. But I do have all these memories, so I guess that counts as well. I regret never pushing myself outside of my bubble when I was younger. I am now incredibly numb regarding relationships because of it. Nothing hurts more than a missed opportunity. A guy offered to trade me a really nice 12-string guitar for the one I had. Clearly mine wasn't as nice as the one that I was being offered. I was suspicious and therefore refused the trade. I could kick myself. It's not a good idea to have a 12 strings as your only guitar. They sound nice, but a lot of things you just can't do with them. Not going to college. Not necessarily because a degree is useful and opens a lot of options, but mainly because of the social aspect. I had quite a few friends in high school, but then once we graduated and everyone went to college, I started seeing them less and less. They almost all lived too far away to see more than once every couple months. And because I wasn't in college, I didn't really make new friends while they did. I still keep in touch with a couple of them, but I haven't hung out with a friend in years. Literally, last time I went out with friends was around 2015, and I used to go out multiple times a week during high school and immediately after. On the one hand, I miss it, but on the other hand, I don't really have any interest in making new friends at this point. And also having an education would be very nice, since I don't really have any skills to get employed doing a real job. The social part does matter more to me though, I think. I gave up back in middle school, just stopped caring about my future because I felt that nothing I was doing at the time had anything to do with it. Now I look back at all the things I could have learned and kick myself for being so short-sighted. I had the chance to buy Bitcoin when it was $10. I had $100 to invest in silver or Bitcoin. Not understanding or trusting some wackadoodle internet money, I bought silver. Not as bad as my parents though, they were in the kind of circles that loved Bitcoin and almost purchased $1,000 worth when it was 20 cents. They would be loaded now. One of my best friends and his mother was shot and killed by his stepfather. A few days before it happened, I told him I didn't want to play Xbox with him. I regret a lot of crap I did during my younger days, but this still eats me up. That I'm very bad at human interaction conversation. I have isolated myself the majority of my life, and it has not done me any favors. I struggle with simple everyday tasks that really aren't hard for most people. I got a DUI 10 years ago. It still haunts me and I find it completely embarrassing. I drank so much that I forgot that I put a 20 in my back pocket for a cab. The reason I forgot was that I drove so many times while tipsy. It didn't faze me at all. It was a wake-up call though. I was drinking way too much and I had to get that under control. It is my biggest regret and nearly ruined my life, but it also shed light on a growing problem. Good on you for making a change. Same thing happened to my brother 13 years ago. Still doesn't have his license. Still drinks almost every day. I wish my husband and I had just eloped. Both of our families were so mean and making us so miserable while we were planning our wedding. Half his family didn't even show up because of spite. We should have saved ourselves a lot of stress and just got married in Vegas like we had been considering. I came here to say the same thing. Our wedding was 100% my biggest regret. I compromised everything away, and even then no one was happy. When I was 17 years old, our family dog had reached the point where her was so bad we had to put her to sleep. When I brought her to the vet, they asked if I wanted to go into the room with her. She had been my dog since I was 5 and I just couldn't see her put down, so I declined to go with them. As they took her away, she looked back at me and that look haunts me to this day. I'm 50. In my senior year of high school, I asked a girl out for a date, and much to my surprise, she accepted. The day of the date she told me she couldn't make it but would be glad to do something the next day. However, she ghosted me from then on. Supposedly, her friends forbade her from going out with me. To say that I wasn't very popular in school would be an understatement. I never got an actual explanation from her of what happened, as she died a few years later in a car accident, and not getting closure on that has been something I've regretted ever since. But the only good thing that came out of it is that I learned that sometimes some things will just never be answered, so don't expect all the stories in your life to have a clean the end. telling the truth to the military. Laugh all you want, but I naively thought the truth would set you free. Nope. I was looked at like I contracted leprosy and I wasn't allowed in. Staying so long with a covert narcissist. It's a slippery slope of insanity. The lessons still haunt me. Don't treat eBay as a dating site. She's getting married this month, I believe, to a great guy, so good on her. Really happy for her. We had feelings for each other in high school, but I was going through my cool smoker phase, so I thought I could do better. I did not and have not. I'm just glad she's happy. I had zero confidence until my late 20s because of acne, being skinny and what I felt very ugly. Found out 15 years after HS graduation that the girl I was into, as in really into, also liked me and would have happily dated me. She is now married to a well-off oil trader, living large in Dubai. Getting a degree in software engineering. By the time I finished, the industry wasn't the same as when I started. I hate the work and have nothing in common with people I work with. There are 100 tools to basically do the same thing, everyone claiming theirs is better than competition, and constant learning of those for any new project is annoying. Outsourcing in India and Vietnam has taken a lot of the work away as well. On the bright side, only 30 years to retirement. I wish I just rented. Being a homeowner is nice, but the stress involved paralyzes me some nights. Renting may have its downsides, but being able to come and go without worrying would be a major bonus for my anxiety. You're paying to live somewhere anyway, whether it's yours or someone else's. Sometimes ownership is overrated. Cheating. It's not worth it at all, and lying to her face was the most gut-wrenching thing ever. She forgave me and told me I was just immature and didn't really understand things at the time. She is a very pretty and very smart girl who is loved by anyone who meets her. Socially we just couldn't connect. I was immature and young. But when I think back, I hated what I did, but after one drunk texting rant with her one night and me sobering up the day after and rereading the texts, she was very understanding and was comforting me cause I was crying. So yeah, welcome to regretty spaghetti. At least you told her and showed how much you regretted it, no matter that you were drunk at the time. If it was me, that was the most important thing I would want under the circumstance, and would make it much easier to bear. Some people are cheated on and never get an apology. I joined a writing group close to 4 years ago. Considering the slippery slope that led to me nearly killing myself because of them, definitely one I have a lot of regrets about. Becoming a Christian. I wasted some prime years on justified judgmentalism and self-loathing. I think I missed a lot of opportunities to be friends with cool people. Rushing into relationships and ignoring red flags cost me a lot of heartache and healing, but I don't regret it fully because deeper issues were resolved. I was walking around Barcelona with a couple friends, and we went into this bakery where there was a giant chocolate croissant. I wanted to buy it and walk around just wolfing down this giant croissant. I didn't. It still haunts me. Not studying foreign languages sooner. It really changes your life in terms of mobility and the number of people you can connect with. Not wearing ear protection in a disco when I was in primary school, because I thought it looked stupid. Got permanent tinnitus. Don't wanna look stupid when going to the disco, yeah. I should have taken a 1-2 year break after HS and before college. Instead, I took a protracted 2-year break halfway through college. And by break I mean I would take one class a semester and eventually drop it to play PS3 and post stupid stuff on the internet. Getting married. Not to neg on people who are married, just saying for me it was the wrong call. I subscribed to the notion that you follow the plan and you're happy. The plan being some balls that my former church drilled into my head. Basically you graduate college, get married, have 2.5 kids, go to church every Sunday and give your money to keep the cult going. Get a home with a picket fence and you're happy. Turns out, I don't like kids. I was actually an atheist in denial, and I didn't much appreciate cohabitation either. I tried to force it. Tried to convince myself that there was something wrong with me, something wrong with my faith, and that if I just tried a little harder I could get past it. Eventually I accepted that there wasn't anything wrong with me, Christianity is balls, and that I just wasn't the sort of person that could follow the plan. Fortunately the marriage ended before any kids entered the picture, so all things considered I got away clean. Sure, I'm out 7 years of my life, but it could have been so much worse. Not looking after my teeth when I was younger. Much pain and fillings, extractions etc, and I'm on my way to dentures before 40, and it's all because I was stubborn about brushing when I was a child. I treated my mom, who is one of the kindest people I've ever known, like crap for 26 years. I grew out of it, somehow, but I can't ever really make it up to her. Sucks. Not expressing my true feelings to someone I loved until it was far too late. She reciprocate the feelings, but our lives have gone two very different paths. But now she is getting married to a man far more successful than I will ever be, and I'm living my best life traveling the world and working with youth. What is one thing that you instantly regretted saying to someone? Was in grad school working on some websites on the side. The director of the African American Studies program was publishing a paper that had to do with slavery in this part of the country, and he wanted a website for his research. When I first met with him, I referred to him as Doctor, and he told me just to call him by his first name because honorifics made him uncomfortable. My reply was, I get my MFA in a few months, which is a terminal degree, and after that, I'll insist you people call me Master. The worst part is that I realized as it was coming out, but nothing could be done. I just gasped out loud, whoa, that is one impressive frick up. Me, your dad's party is really fun right now. Woman, he's actually my husband. Me, screams internally. Happened at a party hosted by a rich guy. All I knew was that the woman was related to him, so I just assumed she was his daughter. Wait, she's related to him and they're married. That's fricked up, man. My first year teaching, and a boy made fun of my receding hairline. It was the second week or so and I still wasn't used to how to behave as an educator and said, oh frick you. Oops. I will be entering my 17th year of teaching, and it still takes me a week or two to defuculate my language from the summer. I can't remember the context, but I told a good friend of mine about a problem I was having in somewhat vague terms, and he attempted to be a good friend and relate to me by describing his own similar problem. What I meant to say was along the lines of, thank you, that's similar, but not exactly the same problem I have. What came out of my mouth was, I hear you man, but that's really not my problem. Oh gosh, I hope he gave you the chance to correct that. When I was maybe 12 or so, my uncle ditched his family overnight. They came over the same night, and while my mom was consoling my aunt, I hung out with my cousins. I'm sure my cousins didn't want to talk about it, but I just kind of blurted out, so your dad's gone. Huh, I had meant to approach it way more delicately, but that's how it came out. Thankfully they just ignored it and moved on from there. 14-year-old me had a job washing pots and pans and doing prep at a clam shack. One slow day I told the boss I was bored. He invented new ways and things for me to clean that day. 30 years later, I have still never uttered those words to a boss, no matter the job. Again, lesson learned. It's good to avoid saying those words in general. We're all responsible for our own entertainment. You're not my real mom. I was in high school and my mom didn't want me going to her party. I had already told my friends I would go, so I was annoyed with my mom for not allowing it. She wouldn't budge, and I told her that she couldn't tell me what to do because she isn't my real mom. My parents adopted me when I was an infant and I completely consider them to be my parents. I don't even know why I said it. The look on my mom's face after I said it was heartbreaking. I apologized and she told me that it was okay, but I still feel awful about it. Thanks so much for having us. It was a pleasure to be here. Meet to the parents. At the incredibly tragic funeral of a beautiful 6-year-old girl that died of a very rare genetic mutation inherited from her parents that slowly transformed her from a perfectly normal toddler to a vegetable with constant seizures. It was very, very sad, and my brain froze. My mouth panicked, and that's what came out. We were on a work excursion to a casino which was about 2 hours away. We were drinking on the bus on the way there and were trying to finish a 1-liter vodka bottle between 3 people before we got there. When the bus reached the destination, there was an announcement to keep Validid ready. As I was getting up from my seat, I saw 2 of the older women, think mid-50s, sitting behind me looking for something in their purse, and I blurted, "You guys don't need it." The look on their faces is something I will not forget. That is why you need a quick response. Just saying something like they always let the pretty girls in. Dread to love in seconds. Plus, people around who noticed the first blunder will be floored by the later pickup. This was said by my mother, but I think I felt the regret just as much as she did. A guy from a mattress company came and dropped off a mattress a couple days ago. The guy was black. When he came into our house, he made a comment about how hairy our dog was. My mom laughed and said we don't do black in this house. She was referring to black clothing and how animal hair is much more noticeable on it. I think it took the mattress mover a few seconds to realize that's what she meant. I'm a high school math teacher and we had parent-teacher conferences. I had a student in my class whose older sister I know. She is 2 years younger than me. Quick backstory. I have hung out with the sister before while I was a freshman in college and had been over to their house, but have never met their parents. My student's mom came in to meet me and after she introduced herself the first thing I said was I have been to your house before. 2 days earlier a teacher at our school was arrested for child molestation with a student. I instantly regretted that one. That's unfortunate. Played Cards Against Humanity with a few of my co-workers and friends, one of them having gone through a fairly recent divorce. On one of his turns to select the best white card, he reads the CL, and one of the other players leans over and says clitoris. He tilts his head to the side while chuckling and says what's the clitoris and we all start laughing, and when we realize he's being serious, we laugh some more. I, the 22-year-old virgin at the time, who can't believe that this 27-plus-year-old guy doesn't know what the clitoris is, pipe up while laughing dude. If you don't know what the clitoris is, that might be why you got a divorce, which is met with the hardest and loudest laughter of the evening from everyone including him. We all enjoyed ourselves the rest of the evening, but his attitude after that comment shifted from having a good time to I need to keep drinking. And he drank harder and harder as the night went on and I felt worse and worse watching him spiral into drunkenness and bad memories. Looking back, the joke was hilarious, but after seeing what it did to him mentally, I wish I could have kept my mouth shut. I played with my dad and his new girlfriend a year or so after my parents split. He was the card czar and drew the black card. How am I maintaining my relationship status, to which I had the worst card, my ex-wife, which I played. He was so uncomfortable and didn't want to read it. I felt bad. I love you to a girl I had been dating for less than a month in high school. Freaking high school, man. Made it way harder to break up with her for literally no reason. Similarly lost a good friend I've had for years when I said that to her. She made it look like it wasn't so bad, but in the next couple of months she slowly started to create distance. Nowadays, we're studying the same thing and sometimes say hi. Every moment I regret that decision I took. I've got to go feed my cat. Somehow in my naive drunk mind it didn't occur to me that this attractive woman was inviting me back to her place for something more than a place to sleep. At that point I already knew she only had one couch, which would be occupied by her friend. Instead of having hot, kinky, sweaty, insane sex, I went home and fed my cat. Well, at least you're a good pet parent. I was on a work night out, and one of my bosses said that he liked me because I reminded him of his brother, to which I replied, "Oh, that's just because we've both been inside your mum." I can still remember his reaction now, after 15 or so years. Kid, you seem like a weird person. 12-year-old me, your mom seems like a weird person. Kid, my mom's dead. 12-year-old me, she probably couldn't stand to see how fat her son was getting. I don't know why I did it. Savage. Shown a picture of a girl and a much older man posing together. Me, nice pic. Is that your dad? Her, aghast look on her face. No, that's my husband. Someone was peeking through a small glass window in the high school class door. Girl says, "Who is it?" My immediate joke response was, "It's your dad. I just attended her father's funeral about 5 days before." No one laughed. Dude. I'm a 6'5" dude. There was a 15-year-old kid I was babysitting who was really shy and finally opened up to me that his biggest dream was to be a professional basketball player, despite him being really short. I blurted out, "Really? Basketball like an absolute T," and I'm still ashamed of the crushed look in his eyes. 15-year-old, babysitting. I don't think he was short, just 10. I hosted these last 3 parties so I could have an excuse to talk to Yumi as well as Ted Mosby. She immediately let go of my hand. Gatsby. I told the gorgeous Irish redhead that lives next door that she looked knackered, exhausted, only to instantly realize that she just wasn't wearing any makeup. Haven't had a chance since then to try and tell her she looks nice in an attempt to balance it out, but it would probably look like I was trying to flirt with her anyway. This reminds me of something that happened to me. A friend of mine in high school always wore a lot of makeup, and when she didn't I always told her, "You look tired." I didn't know she wasn't wearing makeup. I was never into the makeup game. This went on for 4 years until after we graduated, when I realized she wasn't tired. She just wasn't wearing makeup. A 4-year breakup, if you may. When I was in college, my friends and I played this drinking game called the Buffalo Club. Essentially, if you were in the club, you were not allowed to drink alcoholic beverages with your right hand. If you were caught taking a sip of your tasty alcoholic beverage with your right hand by one of the other Buffalo Club members, they would yell "Buffalo," and you were then required to chug whatever was left in the container from which you were drinking. After I had left school, I went back to visit. I got there late on a Friday night and the partying was already in full swing. They were sitting around shooting the crap and drinking. I was sitting across from a girl I didn't recognize who was repeatedly drinking with her right hand. I figured if she was hanging with my friends, she had to be in the club. So the next time I saw her put her cup to her lips, I pointed and shouted "Buffalo" at the top of my lungs. The buddy sitting immediately to my right leaned in quickly and whispered, "She doesn't have a left hand. She doesn't have a left hand. Then she'd better get used to chugging her drinks." My friend was one of 9 children. His father came into the room and said, "Boys, I'm going to tell you something you'd never thought you'd hear," and my 17, maybe 18-year-old idiot mouth said, "You're gay." He didn't have a sense of humor. Turns out it was some football statistic. I went to a wake at a funeral home for the grandfather of one of my friends. He had been sick for a long time, but somehow, the staff did an excellent job of restoring much of his appearance to what it was before his long-term struggle with cancer. So, as we stood there paying our respects, I simply said, "He looks so good," as if he's resting peacefully. My friend's aunt overheard me and said, "Number, he looks dead," right away. Even though trying to be positive, I felt mortified and wished that I had said nothing at all. At my grandpa's visitation, I was standing at the casket with my mom and dad. My aunt walks up, looks at him and says, "Oh, they fixed Daddy's nose. His nose had apparently been broken and never quite got adjusted correctly, so they had straightened it. It was meant, and taken as such, to lighten the mood." I was hanging out with a friend at my place and he was getting picked up by one of his bandmates. His bandmate shows up with some girl I'd never met. When I tried to introduce myself, she completely ignored me. I jokingly said, "Who died?" "My mother, you butthole." Turns out it had been about a week since her mother had passed away. Like, for realsies. Every time I saw her afterwards, she would glare at me. No amount of explaining could convince her that I wasn't trying to be malicious. My iPod broke, so I put it into rice. Then the next day some Asian kid told me he cut his finger bad. So I said, "Why don't you put it into rice to fix it?" Not only did I sound stupid, but racist too. Not the person who said it, but I was on the other end. Was at my girlfriend's funeral and a friend said to me, "Well, you're single now." Me, half joking, "My mom saved me from a coyote when I was a baby. What has your mom ever done for you?" Friend, "My mom's dead." Luckily he wasn't offended. 3 years later, I still feel awful, though. You couldn't have known though. Well, I was round my friend's house. Around 5-6 people were round the house, when one of my friends I am going to call Kate, walked in the living room completely drunk. She came running over to me and my friends and sat next to me. She looked over, extremely drunk, and said to me, "Hey, can I have a hug?" So I gave her a hug, and for some weird reason I said jokingly, thinking I was funny, "Haha, it's okay. Remember, a BJ is better than no job." The split second I said it, I went from that guy to "Remember to bring your rape alarm" guy in my friend's group. P.S. I'm so dumb. You gave your friend a fake name and then never used that name again. So, my family has this inside joke. If you're looking for something that's right in front of you and can't find it, you look like a man. Suggesting men are bad at finding things. I was at a grocery store when I was in high school, eating at a cafe they had there. This lady, 40s probably, is looking around near the coffee machines. She turned to the counter guy and said, "Excuse me, where is the creamer?" He pointed it out, right in front of her. I couldn't stop myself in time. Take my upvote. I'm going over here to cry with laughter. D. I called my mum a B at the high point of some massive blowout argument about 7 years ago. Never sworn around my parents, let alone at them, before or after then. I still feel horribly guilty about it now. I asked a girl if she wanted to frick. I think about it a lot, and I wish I could take it back. She turned up dead not long after, and I found out her life had not been the happiest. I wish I hadn't been so stupid and actually tried to be friends with her. She seemed cool, and I wish I hadn't been so wrapped up in trying to look cool in front of my friends. I still think about it all the time and hate myself for it. Holy crap. I had an employee who told me she lived in Japan and spoke Japanese. I said, "My aren't you a cunning linguist?" Then I remembered she was gay. My heart stopped and I could feel my face getting red. I started to imagine the lawsuit, being fired, her crying. Then she burst out laughing uncontrollably. Her girlfriend came by later that day. She told her what I said and they both laughed uncontrollably. To be fair, those words make complete sense in context and you could lie and say you only meant it in the most innocent of ways. In an interview for a job I'm glad I didn't get in the end. I went for a job at Best Buy to work in the computer electronics department. The interviewer asked if I had any people skills. I, having abundant friends online, relayed the fact that I'm very approachable, kind-hearted and easy to build somewhat of a relationship with. Then for some freaking reason I thought mentioning the fact that I stopped my online friend from committing suicide. If I can talk him off the ledge, I can communicate rather easy with customers. I have never said, to this day, anything so cringe-worthy, and this is a constant reminder for me to think before I speak. When I was a kid, I was playing soccer with a bunch of kids and there was a special needs kid on our team with fetal alcohol syndrome. We lost the game like 8-10 or something and I don't know what kind of irrational rage I had going on. But I pointed at the kid and said, "It's because of that kid we lost." "Oh, I remember. It's because the other team said we suck or something." It's the equivalent of your enemy team saying GGS. Anyway, I didn't know he was special needs. Nor did I even know what special needs was since I was an ESL student. Nor did I know what FAS was because the school was too dang politically correct to explain what mentally retardation or other health issues are for me to be more understanding of these things. I said sorry, but decades later I still think about this. Okay, but FAS or not, if he sucked, he sucked. It's not right to tell anyone they suck at something, but the point remains. I'm a school bus driver. The absolute worst child on my intermediate run is this girl. She's mixed race and always wore her hair in a bun. She was the most hostile and uncooperative kid I've ever met. She told me I was being racist every time I had to discipline her. Like, she'd be standing up and having a full-blown fist fight while I was doing 45 miles per hour down the road. What the frick, kid? Unfortunately, she had a doppelganger. This other girl was so sweet and kind. I adored her, but I was always mixing them up. They wore their hair the same way, and the school enforced uniforms so they always looked more or less the exact same. I always managed to recognize them correctly though. It got to where I absolutely dreaded going to work and having to deal with the first girl. It was so frustrating that nothing ever got done about her and her family. I was getting threatened and stalked along with some of the students, including the second doppelganger girl. On the last day of school, the second nice girl got on and I didn't notice. When I saw her sitting in the back, where the first girl was not allowed to sit, I sort of angrily called her to the front like, "Get up here." She said, "Ms. C'est fabuloso. Did you think I was crappy doppelganger? Do you think we all look the same to you?" I was so embarrassed. I took another route this year. I'm so glad I won't ever have to see that horrible girl again. But I feel bad about looking like a total racist. Sometimes people do look similar though. Doesn't necessarily mean you were being racist. Was dating a nice guy. Felt a lot of love. He confided in me his mother was a prostitute when he was growing up. Meh, no big deal. We're out shopping together and in the homeware depot saw one of those decorative wooden signs that say love, hope, etc. This one said home. I shouted, hey, you could get that for your mother, and laughed. Cause the way it was packed all you could see was a big, red, wooden sign saying HO. He said what? I quickly said it would be a nice gift for her to have in her house. He didn't buy my excuse and it was a quiet shopping trip after that. Now that's just wrong. Hilarious, but wrong. Told a dead baby joke. I was 10 and loved dark humor. To a family friend after being explicitly told not to. Turns out family friend had previously tried for kids twice. Both stillborn didn't survive. He proceeded to tell me this, to which I responded oh, and ran away. You're the burning shame of that one's going to stick with me until I die. Throw away because I am desperately not proud of this. In my last year of university I good as called my flatmate to yes. We'd been having a few drinks and I made an extremely ill thought out remark about sleeping with her. What made this worse is that I'd made the judgment that she'd sleep with me on the basis of the number of boyfriends she'd had in the past. Well, you can imagine how she reacted to that, and for the next few weeks everything I did or said to try to apologize or make amends seemed to make everything astronomically worse. What I'd said also exacerbated her depression. We ended up barely speaking to each other for the rest of the year. I watched this exact scenario unfold in my uni kitchen and now want to be the cliché redditor asking if I know you. When I was an intern for a cardiologist's office I was responsible for checking patients in and bringing them into rooms. One day a new patient came into our office. He was paralyzed and, of course, was in a wheelchair. As I handed him his paperwork he asked me, so I just fill this out and bring it back up to you? And I replied, yup, that's it. Just take a seat outside and bring it up once you're all done. He stared at me with a blank look on his face and then I realized I just told a paralyzed man to take a seat. I was on the receiving end of this one. I was at the airport with several family members when a rental car employee called out to us, you all look like somebody just died. We had just arrived for my brother's funeral. I was hanging out with a friend and my crush, talking about God knows what. I should mention that I was curious about him so I stalked him a little bit. My friend asked him when his birthday was. Note, at this point my crush and I didn't know each other well. I blurted out his birthday before he could. He was very shocked and weirded out that I knew. Let's just say it didn't work out between us. I better not spill this. Your grandma might shoot me. Talking out loud to my GFS niece 5 hours after her father, grandma's son, shot himself. After a clearly strung out pills, man cut me off, then got out of his car with his 8-year-old-ish son and they both started flipping me off and calling me a stupid W and the like. I yelled back, next time I'll just run your stupid butt over so maybe your son will have a chance at having a real dad. Man shut up and staggered his way into the store while his young son kept shouting profanities. The kid is a lost cause but at least you put the dad in his place. This is more along the lines of what someone has said to me. My sister passed away a few years ago, and although she was older we still looked identical. People still call me by her name when they see me. I always come back with, sister's name here is a dead one. I'm Ali. The look on their faces is priceless. Maybe a dong move, but it gives me a chuckle, and I'm sure she'd do the same if it were me. Sounds like something George Weasley would do. My former best friend I've known for 10 years, she, Asian, was making fun of one of my cousins relentlessly about his ethnic background. He's black and Asian, saying he looks confusing because of the mix and saying he's a wannabe Asian. She has a preference for dating only black guys and has gone around the block, so I knew her background. Well, when she said that to my cousin, I got pretty pissed off and said something like, well, he's 2 races, which is pretty awesome to me, whereas you will never be black no matter how many black guys you let unload inside you. which is probably half this city, right? She had the look on her face like someone told her that her family member died. That's when I knew I fricked up and instantly said I didn't mean that, and she walked away and drove away. A week later, a mutual friend called me saying she has been crying for a week and said that she knows that I didn't mean to hurt her like that, and she apologized about what she said about my cousin, but she is really deeply hurt. I sent a very long apology text to her number and she texted a similar type of apology back. Well, although we apologized, we never been the same again. We basically stopped contacting each other after a while. It's been 7 years since that incident, but I remember it like it was yesterday every time I think about it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.